I'm trying to say is on these principles, we should all try to create a good atmosphere in the country. That's what I meant when I said, Hindu as a general way of life. In fact, I don't agree with the Supreme Court's proposition. In my book I wrote, Supreme Court gave a very interesting judgment. Nowadays, Supreme Court, our judges give judgments on anything and everything.
But they're asked to.
They are asked to, they give it.
Yeah.
So they gave a judgment on defined Hindutva as not a religion,
but a way of life.
But a way of life. My simple point is, which religion is not a way of life? Is Islam not a way of life? Doesn't it dictate how to live, how to do, how to pray? Every religion is a way of life. What Hindu Dharma has always been is not a way of life. There are many ways of life here, but a view of life. How do you view the mankind? So that important view of life is what we mean when we say Hindu Dharma or Hindutva, whatever. Thank you.
Sir, last question, yes.
Yes.
I'd like to give someone else a chance, if I may.
Mr. Ram Madhav, I have heard you several times on television.
Quickly, please.
The simple question is that same Vivekananda, whom we term as the brand ambassador of Hindutva, said, "My religion is in my kitchen. My God is the cooking pot. My religion teaches, don't touch me, I am sacred." So he said Hindutva cannot be liberated if we put our religion inside our kitchen. My second question, the name-changing politics will not stretch Hindutva too far. For example, if you convert Allahabad into Prayagraj, till earth revolves around the sun, people will call it Allahabad. If you term Victoria Terminus as Chhatrapati Shivaji, people will not call it Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminus.
Got it. Firstly, good that you seem to be a good follower of Vivekananda. Please follow him in letter and spirit. He has many things to tell to all of us. So he should be followed. I mean, he should be understood correctly, not out of context, but he should be followed. Number two, change of names, people may, in some cases, disagree. But largely, it happened, right, not today, after independence. Many governments have done that in many places. They continue to happen. Calcutta was not changed into Kolkata by Narendra Modi or somebody. It happened. Because there was that historical memory of Kolkata, it became Kolkata. So, if somebody wants to still call it Calcutta, they can call it, they can try and Google it out, but on the railway reservation chart, it won't come. You can't help, you have to type the right new meaning. So, it's up to you. Freedom is there in India, it's up to you.
Great. I'm sorry, I think we're completely out of time. Okay, quickly.
Thank you.
And no two questions, one question.
One.
No comment.
How do you look at spiritual education in our curriculums? Like when there is a lot of controversy nowadays regarding madrasas or Saraswati Sisu Mandirs or different school of. Should it be imparted in the school curriculum or not? Or people to explore their own religion and their faith?
No, all good things about all religions should be imparted to all children. Not just about any one particular faith system, but all good things about all religions should be imparted. What are not good, not contemporary. Like, in Hinduism, this word mlecha used to be there until 18th century. We used to call people mlechas. Mlechas means they are they are fallen people, they cannot be equal to us and all that. You can't bring it because it was there in 18th century. Similarly, kafir word is there. You cannot bring it today. You cannot make it constitutional today. It can remain in scriptures. Heathens, there is a belief in Christianity. You can't bring it today. So what is good for today, what good things that religions teach today should be taught in schools or education institutions today. There should be a system of where every student understands all good things about all religions. This is not my statement. In 1972, Guruji Golwalkar, when he gave an interview to Jilani, an Iranian scholar, he said it. All good things about all religions should be taught to our generations. That becomes a part of spiritual education, religious education. No harm in that. But one simple, humble submission I make. Please don't forget that a child spends 4 or 5 hours in a day, 4 or 5 days in a week in a school. Rest of the time, he is with us. What we teach to him in our houses, in our mohallas, in our neighborhood. We have a storyteller, Ritparnaji here. Those traditions used to teach the values actually, not the schools. Curriculum, when I was a young man, same curriculum. I had different type of things in education. But what we used to get was from our households, from our grandparents, our other institutions, our temples used to teach many good things. Our even religion, our even caste organizations used to teach many things. So many street players used to come, they teach many things. We have finished off all those institutions. Now we blame education, it is not giving good education. Of course, education should give good values, no doubt. But what about our responsibility? 7 बजे होते ही Netflix के सामने बैठ जाते हैं. Dinner भी Netflix के सामने होता है. Family dinner ही होता नहीं है in many houses. And we talk about education not giving values. It won't work. We, society, also has to shoulder the responsibility of transmitting values through different means, while education is also a very important medium. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a Netflix producer here, Parveen. So, Parveen,
By the way,
you're
I also
responsible
watch
for that.
Netflix regularly.
Okay, great. I'm glad. Thank you very much. It was a most enlightening discussion. Thank you, audience, and I think a round of applause.
Yes, a big round of applause, please. It was such an invigorating session to begin the day with, so much of freshness. So may I please request the CEO of the TNI group, Ms. Lakshmi Menon, to kindly do the honors, present a memento to our guest. Can we have a good round of applause, please? Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Before we go for the second session of the day, which is going to be very interesting, there's a little bit of announcement for the school debate that we have. We have scheduled it at 12:30, and we would like to declare the topic of the debate. It's Chetan Bhagat or Amish Tripathi, who is better at telling India's stories. This is the topic of the debate. I would request all the students participating in the debate competition to kindly step out of the auditorium. Seema Rajpal would be there, my colleague Seema Rajpal. She will be guiding you on the rules and regulation. Just the 12 students who are participating in the debate may please step out of the auditorium for the detailing on the session. So the time has come for the most interesting and most awaited session of the day, and I'm sure everybody of us knows who's the gentleman who's going to grace this session as the chief speaker. As Indians, we've always been hooked to Bollywood for its romances, comedies, actions, and potboilers. The lives of stars never fail to excite us. Their life of struggle, courage, and resilience, their fortunes and misfortunes are part of the Bollywood dream machine. But Kabir Bedi appears to be different, maybe because of his unique journey. The Sandokan man, who bedazzled in the bold and the beautiful, has told his tumultuous journey through his no-holds-barred autobiography, Bollywood, Hollywood, Stories I Must Tell, which was published in 2021. I have the pleasure of inviting onto the stage Mr. Kabir Bedi, the man who has retained his charm over generations of fans and followers. From Bollywood to James Bond, the list of movies that have had an impact on us remains endless. In 2010, the Italian government knighted him with the title of Cavalier, Italy's highest civilian honor, for his lifetime achievements as an actor. He has been a voting member of the Oscars Academy since 1982. I personally am a big fan, so I have no other word than to ask my colleague Kaveri to kindly honor him with a bouquet first.
So, as Kasturi said, we've been waiting to listen to you, and we have a packed hall. Thank you so much for all of you joining us. So, Kabir, I can call you that.
Please.
It's been such an amazing journey, but let's talk about your relationship with Odisha a little.
Right.
With, through Pratima.
Well, many
Yeah.
links with Odisha, because firstly, I have the greatest respect for Dr. Samanta, because I know the amazing work he's doing for tribal children at the Kalinga Institute of Social Services. I know the Kalinga Institute of Technology, which gave me a doctorate as well. I did the voiceovers for some great Sone Lumia shows in Konarak and Dholi, which talks about the history of Odisha. And of course, my first wife, Pratima, who became one of India's leading Odissi dancers, learned her craft and art from the great Guru Kelucharan Mahapatra, who was a legend in his lifetime. And of course, last but not least, your wonderful Chief Minister, Naveen Patnaik, has been a friend of mine since college. And he was a remarkable human being who led a very, very different life before he chose to enter
Yes.
politics. And he was part of the New York jet set, and then he suddenly gave it all up to come into politics and is now India's longest serving chief minister. So I bow to Naveen's achievements.
Wonderful. So we've established your love for Odisha and your connection for it, with it. You know, there's so much to talk to you about, but let me begin with the idea of this young man who first stuns people in Bombay with almost nude back in Tughlaq for Alec Padamsee, who made you actually lift weights for it. And you said you would only lift weights if he lifted weights with you. The idea of you and Alec Padamsee lifting weights together is just too mind-boggling for me. But this idea, this young man who sort of stunned Bombay theatre, that was your real arrival, wasn't it?
In terms of the dramatic arts, yes.
Yeah.
Because, you know, acting was always a hobby in my life. And I acted in school where I won the Kendall Cup for Best Actor. I acted at St. Stephen's College in Delhi. And when I joined advertising in Bombay, I continued acting. And my great good fortune was that Alec Padamsee was my boss.
Yeah.
And he realized what I'd done as an actor and cast me in Tughlaq, Girish Karnad's first great play in English. And it led to, it just became one of the biggest theater hits, because the opening image that Alec had of this production, which is not in the script, but Alec is always one of those people that had spectacular ideas, was that the play would begin with me standing on the stage with my back to the audience, looking absolutely naked. And so as the curtains parted and the lights came on, you saw this man standing back to the audience, completely naked. And the audience went, to see a naked man on stage was something extraordinary. It was a shock to their system. And mind you, we're talking about the 70s here, so it was even more of a shock to the system. And then the royal courtiers come, dress him, and then Tughlaq turns around and begins his opening oration to the crowds. That set the pace for making me known in Bombay, Mumbai in those days. And it led to everything else. But it led to roles in Bollywood, it led to the Italians discovering me, it led to my success and stardom in Europe, which in turn led to many other things. But Kaveri, you know, if I look at my book today, and I look at how people have received it, it's been received very well, I must say.
It's been translated into
It's been
several
translated
languages.
into Italian, into Hungarian, into Marathi, even the Hindi edition is out right now, Kahi and Kahi. What people seem to have got from the book is not just a tale of achievements, because that is interesting, but it doesn't directly impact people's lives. what it seems to have touched is the fact that there's a certain vulnerability to my writing. I've not been afraid to talk about my mistakes. And I think my mistakes are what, and I've made many mistakes. For all my successes, I've made many mistakes. I think the mistakes is what people relate to because they can see, you fool, how could you make a decision like that? Or they could say, my God, I better watch that situation. I shouldn't make a mistake like that. So I think that my mistakes have defined my book as much as my triumphs. And this has been true of all stages of my life, whether about my love life, whether about my professional life, or whether about my successes or failures. It's also how I recovered from those mistakes. That is also important for everyone in their lives. We all make mistakes. We all have huge setbacks. The question is, how do we recover from that? And my book is not written like, a primer of how to achieve success in 3 easy steps.
How I did this, how I did that, yeah.
It's just told. People draw their own lessons from it.
Yeah.
And the important thing here is that whatever lesson they draw from my book is straight out of my raw experience, my raw emotion, because I've shared the agony of the consequences of the decisions that I made, as well as the joys that I had along the way. See, I've had a very adventurous life. Now, everybody wants an adventurous life. Who doesn't want an adventurous life? But not everyone is willing to pay the price of an adventurous life, the uncertainty of it, the ups and downs of it. And this is an account of an adventurous life and all the dangers that accompany that adventure. So, even if you want to find out how crazy people like me have lived my life, it would be of great interest to you, because it'll be an extension of your adventurous self had you taken that path less traveled. And therefore, I think it would be of interest to those who read my book.
And a lot of it perhaps is in your DNA. Your parents were the coolest people and the most adventurous, weren't they?
Well, they were more than adventurous. I mean, my parents, in a word, were students at Oxford. They met there. My mother was English. And yet she chose to marry my father and follow him back to India when all he promised her was that I'm going to fight the British and you will have to wait outside jails for me. But she believed in idealism. She loved her country, England, but she hated colonialism. And she said, I will fight colonialism with you. So they came back, and then my mother became part of Gandhi's nonviolent struggle. She was one of his hand-picked satyagrahis for leading the demonstration in our hometown. My father was a communist and a rabble-rouser and a terrific orator. Both of them spent time in jails. And after independence, they didn't follow the fruits of political gains. They each found their salvation in discovering religion in different ways. My father as a very original philosopher, descendant of Guru Baba Nanak. My mother as a Buddhist nun, and she went on to become the highest ranked Buddhist nun in the world in the Tibetan tradition. So these are extraordinary.
Called Momola by the Dalai Lama.
The Dalai Lama used to call her Mamila.
Mamila.
There's a reason for that. Because when the Tibetan refugees came out from Tibet with the Dalai Lama in 1959, after the Chinese decided to try and took over Tibet, hundreds of thousands of refugees followed him across the Himalayas. And God knows how many hundreds of thousands perished because they couldn't take the usual routes across the Himalayas. They were guarded by the Chinese. They had to go through trackless routes, and God knows how many died. But over 100,000 reached India. And Pandit Nehru sent my mother to look after them at the Misamari refugee camp.
Right.
And because I was there at the camp watching all this, and my sister Guli, we used to call her Mummy. So the refugees started calling her Mamila. La is a term of respect, like G, Mamila. So she became Mamila to a whole generation of Tibetan refugees. And then later, she actually set up an institution which trained the highest lamas of Tibet to speak English. Because she said, these lamas do not need a vocation. They can't be sent to till land and build roads. They have a vocation. They're great teachers. All they need is the language. So from this school that she created, the Young Lamas Home School, a whole generation of Tibetan lamas went into the West, and virtually all the big monasteries set up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s in Europe and America were created by students of the Young Lamas Home School. So she had a huge influence in the spread of Buddhism in the Western world. So there are many stories like this in my book. This is just the story of my parents. And the remarkable thing about my parents, since we're still talking about them, is the love, respect, and relationship they had with each other, even when divided by beliefs, even when divided by geography. The bond that existed between these two people, from their days in Oxford to the end, was just extraordinary. It's one of the most touching stories in my book. So I think my book is worth the price of it just to read that story.
No, a lot more. The struggles you've had with handling people with mental health issues, I mean, I found that the most remarkable, not just, of course, with Parveen Babi, but your son, which I cannot imagine how you wrote that. It must have been the hardest thing you did. But those experiences are so raw. It's almost as if you're writing it, you wrote it then. It reads so raw. Talk a bit about those.
My book is sort of divided into various chapters. You can read it in any order you like.
Yeah.
Because it's written that each chapter is a story unto itself. So one of the stories that I've written is about my relationship with Parveen Babi, which coincided actually with the time of my great success in Europe. And while she was going through a mental breakdown. So that was one thing, and then all that followed from there. And the other story was the story of my son, who was a brilliant young man, graduate of Carnegie Mellon University, the mecca of infotech, who was struck down with schizophrenia at the age of 25 after graduating. And so it's tragic enough when anyone gets schizophrenia, but when that child is so brilliant and with such promise of the world to come and the dawn of the internet age at that time.
He probably would have been heading one of these.
Could have been.
Yeah.
He had the capacity.
One of these companies.
So the struggle to try and have him cured, have him brought back to a normal life, and above all, my struggle, and this is what the story is based on, it's based on the last 3 months when he realized what his diagnosis was, and he started talking about committing suicide. And how for 3 months I tried to prevent him from committing suicide, because this was an epic battle of trying to give somebody hope who had lost hope, who had every prospect in the world, and yet didn't believe in it. So I have dealt with mental issues with people that I've loved in great depth, and I've shared that journey in 2 stories in my book, because I think it relates to many.
Yeah.
Because even many people here may not suffer from these maladies, but they will know of somebody that does, or some family that is looking after people who have schizophrenia, or bipolar conditions, or other mental conditions. And I think it's important to know that the suffering is not only those who are afflicted with these.
Oh, the entire family.
The entire family. Because the family sees this child, this boy, this woman that they love. But that person is no longer the same.
Yeah.
Something has changed in them in ways they cannot understand. And they keep trying to adjust for it. And it is equally, perhaps more difficult for the families and the caregivers than for the afflicted person himself. So those dilemmas are things that I've explored in my book, because I think those are things that certainly relate to my life, but also will relate to yours, or people that you know, or people that you care about. And hopefully it will shape your attitude towards those who are afflicted with such problems, because it's not just saying, "Wo to ladka pagal ho gaya hai." It's not that simple. These are very complex, sensitive human issues, and we must all give it the understanding and respect it deserves.
Let's talk about something happy.
Okay, let's talk about things happy.
Your remarkable successes in opening doors for Indians now. I mean, it's difficult even now, but I cannot imagine 1977 Sandokan, 1983 Octopussy. How many of you have seen it? I think almost everybody
Bond
must
film,
have.
yeah.
It was such an iconic moment for Indians, you know, to have
Yeah.
you as James Bond's villain,
Right.
arch enemy. What were those experiences like at a time when, you know, having brown people was virtually something that
This
one
was
hadn't heard of?
this was one of the biggest battles I
Yeah.
faced in Hollywood, was the fact that they weren't writing roles for people from Asia or for foreigners.
Not even blacks at that point.
Correct, not even
Yeah.
for blacks, it's just not even for foreigners in
Yeah.
general. I was extremely fortunate that the role I was asked to play for the Italians was the role of an Asian pirate.
Yeah.
And therefore, I became this romantic, glamorous pirate who fell in love with this English girl for the Italians. And that success gave me a lot of strength throughout my career. Gave me the strength to move on to Hollywood. There were other reasons for that too, but I don't have time to explain it all. But yeah, I mean, when I shot the Bond film, it was, so Sandokan was a great success in Europe. The Bond film, let me tell you the high point of the Bond film for me. They shot a good part of it in Udaipur.
Yeah.
And here I was, an Indian actor, living in the Shiv Nivas in Udaipur, in these beautiful suites with Roger Moore on my left and John Glenn, the director, next to me, and the Broccoli family, the producers there, and Louis Jordan, etc. And we're looking down on the Lake Palace in Udaipur, and it's evening, and the sound of the birds is there. And I'm thinking to myself, have I died and gone to heaven? This is...
And the Bond girls. There were
And the
lots of
Bond girls, and the Bond
Yes,
girls. The
not
Bond
to
girls were
forget
living
them.
separately, but we saw them often enough. But I thought it was like I died and gone to heaven. An Indian actor in Udaipur, overlooking the Lake Palace with the Bond team,
Playing a Sikh.
playing a Sikh, which is what I am.
Yeah.
So it was really extraordinary. And then what happens is, and this is what I discovered, when you become part of a big franchise, and the Bond film is the oldest film franchise in the world and one of the most successful.
Before Marvel and DC.
Yeah, long before any other franchise. You become part of a kind of ecosystem,
Right.
which is an ecosystem of fan clubs, conventions, symposiums, events around the world with fans, where they invite you, honor you, celebrate you, and write to you in their thousands. So this was my first experience of real global stardom.
Right.
The next came, of course, when I was part of the Bold and the Beautiful for 1 year. And that was a show watched by 1 billion people. So that, again, was the second wave in the 90s of understanding what global stardom means, because letters from every country in the world come to you. And people around the world have seen you. And unlike America, where shows like Bold and the Beautiful are seen as afternoon shows,
Yeah.
in the rest of the world, including India,
It's
they're
prime
prime time shows at night. So these were seminal events for an Indian actor who went from Bollywood and made a career abroad, not only in Europe, but in America as well. And I must say, it was a heady feeling, but it's not a simple road. It's not a simple road because the biggest obstacle, as I mentioned in the beginning, is they were not writing roles for foreigners. And so I had to follow a slightly different thing. I said, okay, they're not writing roles for Asians. I will play any foreigner. So I played Italians, I played South Americans, I played Russians, I played Germans. I played a variety of different nationalities because fortunately I could.
Yeah.
And that helped me get through the problem of people not writing enough roles. Those are certainly among the problems. But you know, you advertise this session as Bollywood, Hollywood, stories I must tell. So people probably have come here probably expecting a lot of Hollywood and Bollywood stories.
Please, go ahead.
So,
What were the fun things that you can tell us about? Bollywood, of course, for us, you will always be the horrible Khoon Bari Maang
Khoon
villain.
Bari Maang.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
what a
well-
horrible man you played.
I'm glad I convinced you. That's what I was paid to do. But you know, speaking of Khoon Bari Maang, I was actually living in Hollywood in those days. I was shooting a series with Tom Selleck
Right.
called Magnum PI
Yeah, yeah.
in Hawaii.
Wow.
And I was sitting in my hotel room in Honolulu, looking out of the sea, and the sun was setting, and this golden light was reflecting off the sea. I think, what a lovely evening it is. And the phone rings. And those days there were only landlines. So I pick it up, and it's Rakesh Roshan calling from India. And I knew Rakesh from before. I said, Kabir, I've got a film for you. I want you to be the hero of my film. I said, what's the matter, Gudu? Have all the stars in Bollywood gone on strike that you're calling me in Honolulu to play a hero? He said, no, Kabir, the thing is, the hero in my film becomes the villain. And no hero is willing to play this role. So I said, okay, thank you. It's a left-handed compliment, but yes, I'll take that. He said, the other thing is that I put a villain in the role, there's no surprise.
Yeah.
So you're the only man who's got this image. You could be a hero, you could be a villain, you could be anything. I need you. I thought, well, okay, who's the heroine? He said, Rekha. I said, done. Done.
I mean, that's a no-brainer. Who would
Because
not be,
Rekha at that time, she'd done Umrao Jaan, she'd
Yeah.
won national awards. She was the height of her powers as an actress. So for me to come back to India and be paired with Rekha
Yeah.
in Khoon Bari Maang was a great and wonderful opportunity, and it certainly proved to be my biggest Bollywood hit
Yeah.
to date. And I've got to be grateful to him for that. So that was one of my Hollywood, Bollywood stories. The other thing I must tell you is I did 3 films with Omar Sharif. The first was a film called Ashanti, which with Michael Caine and me in the lead, which I shot in the late 70s. And then, a couple of years later, I shot a miniseries called Red Eagle with Omar Sharif and Timothy Dalton. And then I shot, towards the end of the 80s, another series called Beyond Justice with Rutger Hauer and Omar Sharif. So Omar Sharif became like a friend of mine. I got to know him well. And we had this strange relationship where we'd take each other's roles. So when I was shooting the Bond film was supposed to finish by Christmas. And I had signed a miniseries called The Far Pavilions,
Oh, right.
which was Home Box Office's first miniseries ever. And I was series. And I begged the producers of Far Pavilions that please delay it for a week. He said, I can't. On January 10th, a procession begins in in Jaipur, where you are leading the parade of horses and elephants, and journalists from around the world are coming, and I cannot delay that. So he went and signed Omar Sharif for it. Then, when it came to Ashanti, the role that I played, which was a co-equal role with Michael Caine, Omar Sharif was actually signed for that film. But they decided to shoot in Israel. I said, I'm an Egyptian actor, they'll kill me if I shoot in Israel.
Absolutely.
So I got signed for that role. So we did this a couple of times in my life. But Omar had also had a particular quirk. When we were shooting on location, he ate very little. He'd have some coffee, some cashew nuts, etc. In the day, he was not interested in eating. His big thing was the evening meal. So evening meal meant he'd go to the chef in the kitchen, design a table for 6 or 8 people, wonderful menu, and then come to the set, and then he'd decide who he wants to call for dinner. He says,
Right.
Kaveri, join me for dinner this evening. Kabir,
Wow,
join me for this
wouldn't
dinner.
I love it?
Everybody loves it. So he'd make this wonderful table of 6 or 8 people. He was a very intelligent man, Omar Sharif, but also very easily bored. So if the conversation on the table was interesting, he'd be active, he'd be participating, etc. If the conversation became boring, then he would look for a fight. He'd wait to see somebody who says something, he'd say something and somebody say, some American actor say, well, Omar, that's your opinion. And he would go for her. What do you mean my opinion? You aggress me when you say this. You think I have an opinion? I know. What do you know? And this fight would start. And this evening, every time ended up either with the guest leaving the table in tears or with Omar banging down the plate or napkin and walking off the table. This was his regular pattern. Because he didn't like being bored, and this was his way of getting excitement.
I suppose when you're in Lawrence of Arabia, you know, it can only go downhill from there.
No, Omar was one of my role models.
Yeah.
Because he was one of the people from I regarded as the East,
Absolutely.
who would
yes,
actually
he
become a major
became a
star
huge
in
star.
Hollywood. And I had
Yeah.
the greatest respect for Omar.
Right.
And he was a bit of a wild card. He had his tempers. We had our fights too, but eventually he was a great friend. And I missed him deeply when he passed away.
Yeah. But what a magnificent career you've had, Kabir. When you look back, do you think there was one, I mean, apart from Sandokan, of course, which was so iconic, was there, and Bond, any one role that you really, really loved and you thought that was really you?
You know, I have played Shah Jahan on stage and on
Screen, both.
The screen version, unfortunately, didn't do well out here. But I really loved the role that I played. And when I played him on stage, this was in Canada at the Luminato Theatre Festival, which is one of the foremost performing arts venues in the world. It was done with an operatic scale. And we had 12 dancers from Kumudni Lakhia's Institute of Dance here come there, and they made it into a kind of dance drama. So when Shah Jahan is imprisoned in the Red Fort, where he can see the Taj Mahal, but is not allowed to go to it, and he's imprisoned with his daughter, Jahanara, which is played by Lisa Ray, and it's like King Lear talking to the elements and talking to his daughters. When he talks to her about the coming of the Mughals, etc., these dancers come on and you hear the horse beats.
Right.
And it was very audiovisual. And then his dreams of how he built the Taj Mahal, his love for Mumtaz, all that. It was, and I was on stage for 90 minutes non-stop talking. And I really loved playing the role of Shah Jahan, both on stage and on screen. Unfortunately, it's not been seen much on screen here, but on stage it got some phenomenal reviews in Canada. And I felt very close to Shah Jahan. In fact, I've done the voices of Shah Jahan in many Sonia Lumiere's also, at the Red Fort in Delhi, Nishat Bagh in Pakistan, in Srinagar. And I have had a great feeling for Shah Jahan, because when I grew up as a child, I would see the Red Fort or the Jama Masjid in Delhi, and I always felt blown away by Shah Jahan. And in fact, I wanted to become an architect. That was a career I wanted to follow. Unfortunately, as you'll see from my book, many factors in the family's economic, they had no money basically. I couldn't afford to go to study architecture. And so I studied history at St. Stephen's so that I could work in All India Radio at the same time to pay for my college. And that itself led to the interview with the Beatles.
Famous Beatles interview,
and many
which
other
I hope you all know was erased and recorded over,
Yeah.
which is a story in itself. 2 quick questions, then, quickly. Please. Yeah, go
Please.
ahead, go ahead.
Kabirji, my question is, you have been Kabir, the theatre artist, Kabir, the Bollywood artist, the Hollywood artist, Kabir, the television artist. Have you thought of Kabir as a politician like your close friend Naveen ji?
I'll leave that to Naveen. You know, it's not that I wasn't interested in politics, because my family fought for the country's freedom, and I was very idealistic about what I wanted for India, and I believed in India. But I was never rich enough to be a politician. And I realized that if I entered politics to make money, then the whole point of my entering politics was negated. So I never had the money to enter politics. I had the interest. But then, by the same token, my career as an actor took me out of India. I've been out of India for over 25 years, between Italy and Hollywood and England. Over 25 years have been spent abroad. And so the politics of the country has always interested me, but I've never been able to participate in it as a politician. I have been part of debates on television. I have been part of the discussions that we have on the way India should go and where and what is happening. So politics is of interest to me, but not as a profession. I'll leave that to people who are willing to give their lives to it in a different kind of way.
I hope you know that Kabir is one of the few people who actually lost money on Apple. He lost a fortune
Yes.
that he'd invested, and at a time when Apple shares were declining.
I invested in Apple when it was $2, believing in the future of the company. And what I learned in the stock market is that you can be right in the long term, but dead in the short term. Because in the short term, it went down to $1, and I'd leveraged my bets, so I lost even more. So, you know, the story of my financial reverse is also part of my part of my book. In fact, between the death of my son, the suicide of my son, which devastated me and left me incapable of working for a period of time, and the financial mistakes that I had made, and the investments that I truly believed were bulletproof investments, and I invested heavily in them, and I lost them all. So, financial disaster, emotional catastrophe, all these things hit me at the same time. And that's why I left Hollywood. And how I rebuilt my career is also the final chapter of the book. So the lesson essentially here is we all make mistakes, but we can all recover from mistakes if we go back to the strengths that made us a success in the first place. Because that is all inside us. If you've had any degree of success, it's because you did that. And in your darkest moments, spend your time mourning that moment. It's important to mourn it. Say, yes, I screwed up. I made mistakes. Disasters happened to me. How do I rise from this? Because moping about it and blaming yourself about it is not going to solve the problem. You have to find ways of rising. And the only way of doing that is to remind yourself of the strengths within you and of the people in your life who gave you strength. Whether it's your parents, whether it's your guru, whether it's your teachers, people that saw something in you, inspired you, and brought you to be your best. Those are the things that give you the strength to live life again and make it a success again.
That's why I think your memoir is a tremendous act of courage as well, because it takes enormous courage to actually bare your soul to the world and tell them that this is who I am.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Last question? Yes.
Before we get to the last question, I want to take this advantage of presenting you a copy of my book, Kaveri.
I have it, but thank you very much. Last question? Yes, please.
Compared to your time, and the way South movies are performing with the content, with the creativity,
So could you repeat your question, please?
So how are you seeing the current status of Bollywood now when compared to yesteryears and the way the South movies are performing with the content and the creativity?
See, Bollywood is Bollywood. It is one of the most vibrant industries. It's had a spate of some bad films right now. The South have had a spate of some good films right now. That could change tomorrow. The question today is not so much Bollywood versus the South or Bollywood versus Western films. Our whole business is going through the most profound transformation that it has seen in the last 15, 20 years. Because during this pandemic, and perhaps also because of it, the streaming services like Netflix, Amazon, Disney, Sony Live, all these companies that have come up, they have become the de facto means of distribution. People have almost started losing their habit of going to the cinema because अभी आ जाएगी online में 2-3 महीने में आ जाएगी क्या जाने का, and it's expensive to go out. So unless it's a big event film where you want to see and feel the whole experience of this film, that kind of film will draw people to theaters. But whether it's Bollywood or the South, the problem these industries are facing is how do you deal with the new masters of distribution, which is the streaming services? And which films do you choose to make for cinema? Because not all films are going to work for cinema like they did in the past, because earlier cinema was the only way you saw it, or you had to wait months and months for television. Today you can see it within weeks or literally a month on streaming services. So how does Bollywood and the South, and for that matter even films from Hollywood, deal with this new phenomenon that has happened, that has changed the nature of the business completely? Those are the challenges far more important. Bollywood will still create some great films. The South will still create some great films. You know, we always think that the golden age of cinema has passed. Look at those films they used to make in those days. True, but we remember only the good films. You don't remember the bad films that were making then. Today also, we look at all the bad films and we ignore the few good films made. But 10 years from now, you'll be quoting the best films of today saying what films they made then. So cinema will always reinvent itself because we have dreams. We have dreams and we want to market our dreams. We want to share our dreams. We want to create worlds around our dreams. And there'll always be dreamers, there'll always be filmmakers. And whether they distribute through streaming services or theaters or any other medium, the fact is people love cinema and they'll find ways of watching it. And each cinema will rise to the challenge of the new environment in different ways. And I wish them the best because this industry has given me a wonderful life, sometimes a very painful life. But on the balance, it's given me a very wonderful life. And I've seen this business on 3 continents for many decades. And the names change, the game remains the same. Because ultimately it's about creating good films with great talent and great directors and great people that contribute their skills, whether as musicians or cinematographers, makeup people, editors, to create a work of art that lives and endures, makes you laugh, makes you cry, makes you think, gives you a film to remember for all time.
But can you imagine Sandokan as a series now in this world of streaming? My God, it would be a super hit, right?
Yeah, yeah.
All over the world.
Well, it was...
We should petition them to re-release it on Netflix or whatever.
You know, in Italy, they never stopped releasing it because they kept showing it all the time.
All the time, yeah.
But they never had a good English dub on it. They kept it as a European phenomenon.
Right.
And it has worked wonderfully in Europe and the Spanish-speaking countries of South America. And those have been its strongest markets. It will find a market eventually on the streaming services too, I'm sure.
I'm sure.
But,
We'll relive
you know,
those golden days.
Sandokan was one of those phenomenon that had viewership numbers that are not equal till today. They had what's called a 32% share, which is unheard of today. Today, if you get a 5% share, you think it's fantastic. 27 million people out of 60 million people in the country were glued to their television sets. That was an extraordinary figure for television. And that's why I've had this enduring relationship with Italy. I've since then done 6 other series in Italy. The most recent in 2010 with Lino Banfi. But the root of all that, what gave me the strength to all that, and the popularity to do all that, was the original Sandokan series. So that was certainly a series that changed my life. But also, since then, I have regarded myself as the unofficial ambassador between Italy and India, promoting India in Italy and Italy in India. And one of the charities that I support is called Care and Share Italia, which raises money in Italy for children from the slums, picked out of the slums in Hyderabad and Telangana, and then educates them from kindergarten to university, looking after all their expenses. Because Italians care, they care.
Wonderful. We could, of course, go on forever, but
I have a question if I have
Please,
your permission.
please.
Just the last, I should have the liberty to ask
of
it.
course, of course.
I'm asking this question, I did not intend to, but I'm asking this after hearing you live. What an amazing voice you have. Have you engineered it to that, or you always had it?
This gentleman sitting here also talked to me about my voice. Let me say that my voice has not been unappreciated. It has been used in a number of Sonia Lumiere shows, including here at Konarak and Dhauli, but all over India. I do a lot of work on advertising. I do a lot of work on documentaries. And people, even in cinema, always talk about my voice. So I'm grateful that my voice is recognized. The gift of the voice comes from my parents. But certainly, as an actor, I've learned how to develop it, how to project it, how to give it many tones, depending on what's needed. And I've worked on my voice. But the basic voice, I must thank the universe and my parents for giving me such a wonderful voice.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. So we come to the conclusion of this session. Before we mark it the end of the session, may I please request the New Indian Express editorial director to kindly come up on the stage. Sir, Prabhu Chawla ji, to please come up on the stage.
I also want to mention that the Hindi edition of my book, Kahi and Kahi, has also been released. So those of you who like to read in Hindi, please do read it in Hindi. How lovely to see you, Prabhu. How lovely to see you. This is one of my favorite men in journalism. He's so wonderful. That is part of your charm. Thank you so much, Prabhu. I'm most honored.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before we roll in for the next session, on behalf of the New Indian Express, I would like to express our gratitude to our partners, the Aditya Birla Group, KIIT, deemed to be University, JSPL, SNM, MGM Minerals, MCL, NALCO, Infa, Rungta and Sons, ANMS, media partners, Sakala, Nandighosa, and 93 Point Red FM, hospitality partner, Welcome Hotel, outdoor partner, Ajanta and Oxford Bookstore. There's a plug-in for the audience that we have exhibited the books of our radiant speakers just outside the auditorium, which would be available to you, which would be made available to you by the Ajanta and the Oxford bookstore. So audience, what are you waiting for? Go grab your opportunity to get a signed copy from your favorite speakers and authors. Rolling on to the next session. As humans, are we not addicted to storytelling? We all have made stories at some point of time or the other in our lives. Even when we sleep, our dreams whisper story into our heads. So get set for such a dreamy journey ahead. We have with us the very charming storyteller, Rituparna Ghosh, for her session, Show and Tell, When Imagination Takes Flight, My Bag of Tales. May I repeat that Rituparna is anything but just a storyteller. She is a TEDx speaker, international storyteller, and the founder of Your Bag of Tales. So I take the pleasure of giving her a welcome onto the stage, and brace your seats to have a great session ahead loaded with all fantasies. Rituparna ma'am, I call you upon the stage with all pleasure and humble request.
Mike? Thank you. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Namaskar, my name is Rituparna and I've come from Delhi. This is my 4th visit to Bhubaneswar and I totally love this city for the beautiful hearts which open their hearts to stories. Today's story has a story about it. And I will go to the story about the story after you've heard the story. So let's begin, all right? एक थी गिलहरी 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 सी लड़की। ये कहानी है एक लड़की की, एक गिलहरी की और एक खेल की। You know what a गिलहरी is? What is it? A squirrel. एक थी गिलहरी 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 सी लड़की। एक लड़की जो एक खेल, कबड्डी का खेल एक गिलहरी से सीखी। गिलहरी उसकी कबड्डी कोच। वैसे चाहूँ तो मैं ये कहानी शुरू कर सकती हूँ उस कबड्डी के खेल से जहाँ पे ये लड़की कबड्डी खेलती है, लेकिन you will not understand the context of it, right? So let me go with a beautiful flashback into what this story is all about. तो कहानी है एक गांव की जिसका नाम है चिरैया। चिरैया बिल्कुल वैसे ही गांव है जैसे गांव होते हैं। And imagine in that village there are lines of all kind. जैसे दुनिया में आदमियों से, मनुष्यों से, इंसानों से बनाई हुई जो लकीरें होती हैं, वैसी लकीरें इस गांव में भी हैं। All kinds of lines. What kinds of lines do humans make? अमीर, गरीब, है ना? और अच्छा बुरा, वेरी गुड। अमीर, गरीब, अच्छा बुरा, लंबा, बौना, काला, गोरा, मोटा, दुबला, पतला, औरत, आदमी, लड़का, लड़की, जाति, धर्म, ओहो, इतने सारे और सारे lines. So you can imagine all these lines crisscrossing each other and dividing the people into places to stay, places to walk, places to buy their things, and places to come and fight. Because obviously when you have so many lines dividing people, there are clashes. And whether there are clashes, they need some places to fight. And what happens when there are lines dividing people? What happens when there are lines dividing people? People start following groups. People start following communities. दल बनाते हैं, झुंड बनाते हैं, ग्रुप बनाते हैं, और फिर समूह बनता है, फिर ग्रुप्स में बातें होती हैं, ग्रुप्स में एजेंडा बनता है, और ग्रुप्स में भी क्या होता है? लड़ाई. So for many years and many centuries, the fights would intensify, there would be bloodbaths, and there would be killings, and there would be all kind of assaults on one another, till the people of Chiraiya said, बस बहुत हो गया. ये सब नहीं चलेगा. We should not be doing this. We should try and be more civilized. There has to be a civilized way to fight. So they decided to play a game, which would be kabaddi. Well, kabaddi as a game is very interesting. You know, there are small groups. You get to kick, you get to slap, you get to hold the opponent down, you get to pin them to the floor, and you get to feel like, wow, I did it, right? So they decided that kabaddi is the best game to play. No cricket, no football, no other game, just kabaddi. And so people started forming groups. Now, क्योंकि इस गांव में इतने सारे दल थे, तो हो सकता था एक कबड्डी लीग, तो कबड्डी लीग नहीं बना, एक कबड्डी मैच ही बनता. हर साल एक सालाना कबड्डी का खेल. और जितने भी ग्रुप्स हैं वो दो दल में ही डिवाइड हो जाते थे, लाली और नीली. लाली गैंग के जितने सपोर्टर्स हैं सारे लाल रंग पहन के पहुंच जाते थे, और नीली गैंग के सारे सपोर्टर्स नीले रंग में. And people started fighting for whatever they wanted to fight about. So the Lali gang one year would have all the rich, the affluent, the fairer, stronger, you know, and maybe the Neeli gang that year would have all the poor, disadvantaged, the darker skinned people. You get the norm, right? So every year, people would start making these groups that this year the Lali gang is represented by these sets of people, Neeli gang by these sets of people, and then they would come and play. But there was another very interesting thing about these gangs of people, that they were all women, girls. लड़कियां ही कबड्डी का खेल खेलती थी, क्योंकि भाई समाज में सारी जो इज्जत है वो तो लड़कियों में है ना? They are the custodians of all the honor, and if there has to be a fight, let the girls go and have a cat fight, and we will enjoy it, and whoever is the winner is the winner. So that is how it was. So groups ban gayi, gangs of Chiraiya. Now in this village, there was a girl who was the fifth girl in the family, गुड़िया. गुड़िया के माँ बाप भी चाहते थे कि भाई हम में से कोई एक लड़की हो, एक जो लड़की हमारी है 5 में है, किसी एक को इस कबड्डी का खेल खेलने का मौका मिले, क्योंकि खेल खेलना भी होता है बहुत बड़ा ओहदे की बात, रिस्पेक्ट की बात, because you're representing your community, you are going to be fighting or playing for your community, right? So people wanted one of these girls to go, but they were not talented. किसी में वो talent था ही नहीं. And in any case, because कबड्डी के खेल में कितने players होते हैं? 7. तो 7 प्लेयर के लिए पूरे गांव की लड़कियां लाइन लगा देती थी और वेटिंग लिस्ट इतनी लंबी होती थी कि भाई लड़की बड़ी हो जाए, शादी हो जाए, उसकी भी बच्ची हो जाए, बड़ी वो भी बड़ी हो जाए, लेकिन टाइम ना आए. You also had to have the talent to play. Now, गुड़िया, when she was 5 years old, पहली बार अपने बाबूजी के कंधे पर जाकर उसने कबड्डी का खेल देखा. उस साल वो लाली गैंग में थी और लाली गैंग में उसने लाली घाघरा पहना, लाल चुटिया में लाल रिबन डाले, लाल गुब्बारे के साथ, लाल फ्लैग के साथ वो पहुंच गई और वो लाली गैंग को चीयर करने लगी. और उसने खेल देखा और बस खेल देखा. घर आके उसने अपनी मम्मी को बोला, मम्मा अम्मा अम्मा मैं भी कबड्डी खेलूंगी. अम्मा ने कहा, हाँ बेटा खेलोगी, पहले बड़ी तो हो जाओ. And from that year on, every year she would go to watch kabaddi. She would tell, मुझे कबड्डी खेलना है, मैं भी बड़ी होकर कबड्डी खेलूंगी. और हर साल उसकी मम्मी उसको कुछ नया कहती. हाँ बेटा खेलोगी, पहले देखकर सीख लो. हाँ बेटा खेलोगी अगर खेलने लायक हो. हाँ बेटा खेलोगी अगर वो खिलवाए तो. By the time she was 11, 12, her mother said, now I need to do something for this girl. Because every year she says, I want to play kabaddi. And I have to tell her the truth. So वो लड़की को अपने बैठा के बोलती है, बेटा ये खेल थोड़ी है, ये तो जंग है. हम लड़ते हैं क्योंकि लड़ना आसान है. और हम लाली नीली गैंग में इसलिए रहते हैं क्योंकि लोगों को पता चले कि तुम किस दल में हो, कि तुम अकेले नहीं हो, तुम्हारे पीछे और लोग हैं. हम खेलने के लिए नहीं खेलते हैं, हम तो लड़ने के लिए खेलते हैं. खेल तो एक सिविलाइज्ड एक फ्रंट है. बात यह है कि तुम किससे ज्यादा नफरत करती हो, किसके खिलाफ हो, किसको हराना चाहती हो, और तुम निडर हो कि नहीं. Now, to this girl, she did not understand anything. She's like, खेलने के लिए नफरत जरूरी है? हाँ बेटा, वही तो सबसे बड़ी चीज है इस खेल में. जितना ज्यादा नफरत उतना अच्छा खेल. बेटा यही है कबड्डी का खेल. Now, Gudiya did not understand what is this whole thing about this game being about vanquishing the other. Why is it not for the game, for the spirit of playing a game? No respect for the opponent? What is it all about? She was very confused and she did not like it. But nevertheless, she did not give up hope because she wanted to play the game for the spirit of the game. And every day she would go and watch these girls practice. तो गांव में एक dedicated playing arena था जहाँ पे लड़कियाँ रोज प्रैक्टिस करती, खेलती, और सारी गांव की जो बाकी लड़कियाँ हैं जो वेटिंग लिस्ट में हैं वो भी जाके बैठती और cheer करती. And like it happens, लीली गैंग और लाली गैंग में झगड़ा भी हो जाता था, स्पेक्टेटर्स में भी झगड़ा होता था, मारपीट भी हो जाती थी, गाली गलौज भी होती थी. वहाँ चुपचाप बैठे गुड़िया उन सबको लड़ते देखती और खेल देखती. और पता नहीं कब, कहाँ, कैसे उसके दिल में भी ये बात आई कि मैं भी खेल सकती हूँ. और वो रोज जाके पूछती, मुझे खिलाओगे? हाँ हाँ खिलाएंगे, पहले बताओ नाम क्या है, जाति क्या है, गांव क्या है, कौन से मोहल्ले से हो, कहाँ से हो, किसके साथ खेल सकती हो, किसके खिलाफ खेल सकती हो, जल्दी बताओ. नहीं, मुझे तो बस खेल खेलना है. नहीं नहीं, इतना आसान नहीं है हमारे दल में खेलना. पहले हमें डिसाइड करना होगा कि तुम किससे ज्यादा नफरत करती हो और तुमसे कौन मिल बांट के खेल सकता है. वैसे दुश्मन हैं हम एक दूसरे के. कभी कभी तो दल के अंदर भी दुश्मन हो जाते हैं, लेकिन क्या बात है, कौन सी बड़ी बात है. कभी कभी दुश्मन जो बड़ा दुश्मन है उसके साथ लड़ने के लिए, खेलने के लिए हम छोटे मोटे दुश्मनों से दोस्ती कर ले सकते हैं. You know, matter of convenience. She still did not understand. She did not want to go in that space. So she would sit every day watching the game and closing her eyes and imagining herself moving right, moving left, giving a kick, leaping into the air and swinging and holding on to an opponent and cheering. One of those days, she was just doing that. She'd closed her eyes, imagined herself looking at the feet, fast, left, right, up, swing, jump, leap. When suddenly she heard, अरे 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 इसको हटाओ, इसके कहाँ आ गई है, हटाओ इसे. She opened her eyes, she thought, क्या मैं सचमुच अंदर आ गई? तो देखा नहीं, सब उसकी तरफ देख रहे हैं, लेकिन उसकी चेहरे की तरफ नहीं, उसके पाँव की तरफ. Right next to her, near her foot, was a little squirrel. एक छोटी सी गिलहरी. गिलहरी अपना पूंछ उठाए इधर उधर देख रही थी, और जैसे ही उसने अपना पाँव हिलाया, वो फुदक के भाग गई उस पेड़ की तरफ. पेड़ पे वो चढ़ गई ऊपर और खो गई अंदर. लड़कियों से सुना कि गिलहरी का कुछ करना पड़ेगा, रोज आके गेम खराब कर जाती है. Something happened. धीरे धीरे गुड़िया पेड़ के पास गई और वो गिलहरी की तरफ देखने लगी. थोड़ी देर में गिलहरी वापस नीचे आई, पूंछ उठाया, इधर उधर देखा, नीचे झुकी और जोर से भाग के अंदर चली गई, जहां के पैरों के पास, खिलाड़ियों के पैरों के पास. लाइन क्रॉस करके, लकीर क्रॉस करके वो नीली गैंग से लाली गैंग की तरफ पहुंच गई. लाली गैंग के प्लेयर्स के पैरों के पास घूमी और फिर वहां वापस जाकर फिर नीली गैंग के पैरों के पास और फिर वापस आके खड़ी हो गई. कोई नहीं चाहता था उनके पैरों के नीचे एक डेड स्क्विरल, तो सब डर के एक जगह खड़े हो गए. किसी ने डंडा उठाया, किसी ने छोटा सा पत्थर उठाया, कंकड़ उठाया, उसकी तरफ फेंका. गिलहरी तो सबसे भाग के दौड़ के फिर से चली गई पेड़ के पीछे. किसी ने गिलहरी को इतने नजदीक से नहीं देखा जितना कि गुड़िया ने देखा. गुड़िया उस दिन से पेड़ के नीचे रोज पहुंचने लगी कि गिलहरी कब आएगी. और गिलहरी स्क्विरल जो काम करती है वही करती है. नीचे उतरती है, थोड़ा खाना वाना ढूंढती है, खाती है, बैठती है, छुपती है, और जैसे जब मानो वो बोर हो जाए अपना खाना फेंक कर, वो भाग के दौड़ के चली जाती है उन खिलाड़ियों के पैरों के नीचे. राइट लेफ्ट अप, क्रॉसिंग द लाइन, गोइंग टू द राइट, गोइंग टू द लेफ्ट, गोइंग टू द ब्लू, गोइंग टू द रेड, एंड ऑल द प्लेयर्स वुड स्टॉप प्लेइंग एंड दे वुड स्टार्ट रनिंग अवे. ये फिर से आ गई गिलहरी, इसको भगाओ, इसको भगाओ, इसको भगाओ, भगाओ, भगाओ. हाउ मच यू नो अबाउट गिलहरीज? क्या पता है? कुछ तो पता होगा गिलहरियों के बारे में आपको. देखा है ना गिलहरियों को, है ना? क्या पता है आपको गिलहरियों के बारे में? पेड़ पे चढ़ती है, नट्स खाती है और भागती रहती है और बहुत तेज से दौड़ती है. क्या वो डरपोक है कि निडर? निडर. क्या वो खतरे के बीच में भाग जाती है या वो खतरे से दूर भागती है? खतरे के बीच में जाती है. और क्या लगता है? भाग जाती है, बच जाती है. उसको पकड़ना बहुत मुश्किल है. गुड़िया ने भी ये देखा कि गिलहरी को पकड़ना आसान नहीं है. गिलहरियां वैसे उड़ने वाली गिलहरियां भी कहते हैं. देयर आर ग्राउंड गिलहरीज, देयर आर फ्लाइंग गिलहरीज. उसको लगा ये गिलहरी को सारे ट्रिक्स पता है, मुझे कोई गेम नहीं खिलाएगा तो मैं गिलहरी को देखकर सीख लूंगी. एंड दैट इज व्हाट शी स्टार्टेड डूइंग. एवरी डे शी वेंट टू द ग्राउंड जहां पे बाकी सब खेलते थे. वो जाके पेड़ के पास खड़ी हो जाती थी और पेड़ पे वेट करती थी कब गिलहरी नीचे आए और गिलहरी के साथ वो खेले. कुछ दिनों में तो ऐसे लगने लगा कि गिलहरी भी उसके साथ खेल रही है, और खेलते खेलते ऐसा लगा कि वो अपने परछाई के साथ खेल रही हो. वैसे बाकी सब तो उसको देखकर हंसने लगे. अरे क्या हुआ गिरी गुड़िया, हमने खिलाया नहीं तो तुम्हें गिलहरी के साथ खेलने लगी. कुछ महीने और बीते. खेल से दूर अब गुड़िया जाकर नहीं कहती मुझे भी खिला लो. वो तो अपने ही खेल में बिजी थी. बात घर तक पहुंची तो उसकी बहनें वहां आ गई उसको पकड़ के घर ले जाने के लिए कि चल यहां से. उसकी अम्मा ने उसको समझाया कि बेटा ये पागलपन है, ये नहीं करते. कोई गिलहरी के साथ थोड़ी खेलते, परछाई के साथ थोड़ी खेलते. अगर खेलना है तो खेल ठीक से सीखो, इंतजार करो, अच्छा खेलोगी तो तुम सिलेक्ट होगी. लेकिन नहीं, मुझे नफरत के लिए नहीं खेलना, मुझे ना लाली गैंग में खेलना है ना नीली गैंग में खेलना है, बस मुझे खेलना है, उन लड़कियों की तरह नहीं। कौन समझाए गुड़िया को? अब काफी दिन बीत गए थे, लाली और नीली गैंग कोच से दूर, गिलहरी कोच के साथ गुड़िया अपना गेम खेलती। रोज सुबह 9 बजे वहां पहुंचती और 12 बजे तक, जब तक उसका मन करे, गिलहरी उसके इर्द गिर्द ही घूमती। दोस्ती हो गई थी, कोच का सपोर्ट भी था, हंसी मजाक, खिल्ली, उसको कभी चिढ़ाते थे, लेकिन उसको क्या फर्क। एक दिन अपने में ही मुक्त दोनों गिलहरी और गुड़िया खेल रहे थे कि गिलहरी खेल छोड़कर भाग के चली गई कोर्ट के अंदर, और उसके पीछे पीछे अपनी गुड़िया भी भागती दौड़ती पहुंच गई। लाइन क्रॉस कर लिया उसने, वो लकीर के बीच में जाके वो खड़ी हो गई। तो सारे प्लेयर्स ने उसको देखा और उसको सर्कल किया और क्या, ओहो देखो कौन आया है हमारे साथ खेलने, ओ गिलहरी और गिलहरी की स्टूडेंट, कैसी खिलाड़ी बनी हो, देखे तो खिला सकती है तुमको, तुम खेल सकती हो हमारे साथ, खेल के दिखाओ गुड़िया। गुड़िया didn't bat an eyelid. She said, have you played kabaddi? It used to be my favorite sport in school. So let's hear it from all of you. सांस पकड़ के अच्छी तरह, like proper way में, हाँ, खेलने को नहीं कहूँगी, but you can still do your hut. All of you together, can you do your hut with me? Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, go! बिल्कुल सांस नहीं है किसी में, खेलने को बुला लो तो फिर ऐसे ही भाग जाएंगे। कम ऑन, रेडी? I can see so many of you not even doing it. What is this? Not fair. I know, बच्चे ही नहीं कर रहे हैं, उनको लग रहा होगा कि ये तो बड़े और छोटे बच्चों के लिए है। Why can't you do it? I can see a lot of elders are also not doing it. Come on, grown-ups, you can do it. अगर कबड्डी कभी नहीं खेली है तो ये चांस है खेल लेने का. You can say I played kabaddi. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Very good. करते रहो till I finish my story. गुड़िया लपकी, उसने पकड़ा अपने अपोनेंट को और इसको, अरे तू बंद हो गया. ये तो बैकग्राउंड स्कोर था मेरी कहानी का. Come on. थकना नहीं है, कबड्डी खेल रहे हो. गुड़िया लपकी, उसने लड़की को पकड़ा, उसको पटका और 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. ना उसमें जीत का उल्लास, ना अपने ओपोनेंट के लिए नफरत, ना खुशी, ना आनंद, बस खेल खेलने का उमंग. दूसरी लड़की ने उसका हाथ पकड़ने की कोशिश की, इधर आ जा, इधर आ जा, इधर आ जा. उसने कहा नहीं. तो वो फिर से गई दूसरे गैंग के अंदर. इस बार उसको पकड़ने गए. वो लपकी, घूमी, पैर उठाया, छलांग लगाई और एक साथ 4 लड़कियों को पकड़ लिया. और इतनी जल्दी से वो लकीर क्रॉस करके दूसरे साइड चली गई कि किसी को पता ही नहीं चला. ये थी गुड़िया. वो जाके बीच लकीर के बीच में जाके उसने वो खड़ी हो गई और उसने अपने पैरों से लकीर को मिटा दिया. लकीर का तो काम ही वही है. इंसान लकीर खींचते हैं, कभी रियल कभी इमेजिनरी, कि बस लोगों को एक दूसरे के अगेंस्ट ही खड़ा करके लड़वाएं. लेकिन आज पहली बार एक लड़की ने, एक बच्ची ने लकीर को उसकी हैसियत दिखा दी. उस दिन से चिरैया गांव में चिरैया गैंग नहीं, गिलहरी गैंग के लिए जाने जाना लगा. क्योंकि एक गिलहरी पे उनको खेल का मतलब समझा दिया। एक थी गिलहरी, गिलहरी 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 सी लड़की। तो ये थी कहानी, है ना? कैसी लगी कहानी? बहुत बढ़िया, अच्छी लगी, वेरी गुड। अब कहानी की भी कहानी होती है, ये कहानी मैंने खुद लिखी, तो इस कहानी की भी कहानी सुन लें, क्योंकि उसके बगैर ये कहानी थोड़ी सी अधूरी है। आज मैं एक ओरल स्टोरी टेलर हूँ, घूम घूम कर बच्चों को, बड़ों को, कम्युनिटीज़ में, स्पेशल इवेंट्स पे, स्पेशल ओकेजन्स पे कहानियाँ सुनाती हूँ, फोक टेल्स सुनाती हूँ, कुछ मिथ्स, लेजेंड्स, देश भर की, दुनिया भर की कहानियाँ सुनाती हूँ, और कभी कभी कुछ ऐसी कहानियाँ लिखती हूँ जिसे मैं ही सुना सकती हूँ। और हर कहानी के पीछे एक कहानी होती है कि वो कहानी बनी कैसे। तो इस कहानी की भी कहानी है, तो मैं उसको सुनाती हूँ आज। ये गिलहरी एक्चुअली एक रियल गिलहरी से इंस्पायर्ड है। Before I became an oral storyteller, I was a journalist. I worked in television for 8.5 years. And one of my earliest and most first projects as an independent television producer was to do an entire programming set on India when it was 60 years of Indian independence. So this was 2007 I'm talking about. So and as 2007, it was one of my ideas and one of my producers' ideas to saying that let's tell stories of India and Pakistan and people who've been separated. And that as a theme had stayed with me because I grew up in the East. I am from not very far from Bhubaneswar. I grew up in the industrial town of Jamshedpur. Now, living in the East, we have a very different idea of our country. My country, my kahani is very different for people living in the East. But after school, when I went to Delhi NCR and I lived there for 7-8 years, I realized that identity of country and my country is very different for my friends and their families. Because with the idea of India comes the idea of partition. With the idea of partition comes the bloodbath, all the pain, the ache, the suffering, the separation, of why Punjabis are so loud, of why Punjabis want money, why are they accumulating stuff. So all these stories that I saw, the narrative which I experienced, troubled me. And because I grew up with a fair bit of, let's say, India-Pakistan match mein ladai ho jayegi, that kind of a narrative, which we saw not too many days back. But I never understood, why are we always fighting with Pakistan? Right? So there was a part of me which grew up very confused. But only when I became a journalist, I went on, and right before even when I was a student, I read a host of partition literature, watched a lot of partition films to understand where does this angst come from? Where does this story begin? What is the origin of this story, this hate, this mistrust, distrust that we have? This line which is there physically, but the line is far deeper than what we know. So when I became a journalist, one of my assignments was to go to Husainiwala Chowk in Firozpur. And Firozpur has a BSF and a Pakistani Ranger post like the way you have in Amritsar. You know, you've seen Wagah border? Yeah? So something like a Wagah border, but much smaller, much calmer, much private, much intimate, is the line at Husainiwala. And it's a diagonal line. So unlike Wagah, where you have this line and you have India and this way you have Pakistan, in Husainiwala, it's a diagonal line. So you're actually facing each other and you are sitting to watch the parade of the soldiers. And that's when I saw the parade one evening and I was filming it, I was distracted by this little gilehari, which actually went diving between all the soldiers' feet, and which was moving between the India side and the Pakistan side so easily. She would once go and climb up this tree, and then she would go and climb up the other tree on their side. I said, where does this gilehari belong to? Where is her nationality? What is she doing? She is just doing what she does. I remember coming back and I made my camera person shoot that Gilehari. I said, please, I'm going to write a voiceover about this Gilehari. Eventually, it became so long, I had to remove that Gilehari reference from my show, but that Gilehari stayed with me. 2 years back, when the world closed down, as an artist, as a storyteller, I organized a little festival inviting Indian storytellers and Pakistani storytellers to come together and perform. And while I was the organizer, while I was the curator, had helping other people find stories, I couldn't find a story to tell. मैं ऐसी कौन सी कहानी सुनाऊं जो हमारे दोस्ती के बारे में हम साथ क्या कर सकते हैं उसके बारे में करें. And like with everything else, I had forgotten the Gilehari. This Gilehari raised its tail and said, मेरी कहानी है ना, तो मेरी कहानी सुना दो. So there was born my story, Gilehari Gang, and which I am telling you. All of us, we are living in this beautiful country. What you make of your country is your story. Be fearless like the Gilehari. Be brave like the Gilehari. Go ahead and tell your story. That's my wish for all of you. Thank you so much for being a wonderful audience.
Now that's what we call a wonderful session, an exciting session, and truly, it is just mastering the human perception which makes an excellent storyteller. Zindagi ki kahani aur kahaniyon mein hi zindagi hai. So now I may take this opportunity to call upon CEO Lakshmi Menon to present the memento. And I think this session deserves a generous round of applause. Students, please show some love.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I surmise this session truly reverberated the theme, My Country, My Kahani of the festival. I would request another round of huge applause for this session. Literature and debates have been the eternal twins. So we dedicate the next session to a debate which is to be hosted among the prestigious educational institutions of the Bhubaneswar. Now may I request Seema Rajpal to execute the session. Seema, the stage is yours.
Enid Blyton, Roald Dahl, Judy Blume may be the writers you and I grew up reading, but today's readers are spoiled for choice. Today's writers from our country with kahanis that are rooted in our ethos have knocked all international writers off our bookshelves. Don't believe us? Try asking a student about who wrote 5 Point Someone or Immortals of Meluha, and you'll have your answer. Chetan Bhagat and Amish Tripathi are two writers that have captured the imagination of students like no other. With their own distinct style, language, and themes, if there was to be a face-off between the two, who would win? We will let the students decide that in the school debate, which is going to happen now. The rules are pretty simple. There are 6 teams with 2 students each. In the first round, 1 student speaks for 3 minutes. In the next round, the second student speaks for 2 minutes. The third round is the most interesting round, of course. It's the rebuttal round. We will sound off the buzzer 30 seconds before the time's up so that students get their heads up. Students, please do remember that you need to maintain the decorum of a debate, and at the end of the day, we need to agree to disagree, and respectfully so. So without further ado, let's jump right in, and perhaps students can make their way to the stage. Our judges for the debate are, of course, Aparna Karthikeyan. She is an author and journalist. And we also have Rituparna Ghosh, whose session we just saw and enjoyed. Perhaps a round of applause to cheer our students. Run up, run up. I see that you have your phones and tabs. I would request you not to cheat and not to look into them or research. So, the first student who will be speaking from Mother's Public School is Ritvija Das, and she is a big fan of Amish Tripathi. Let's see what she has to say.
Storytelling has been a part of old Indian culture. India is God's beloved land, and this is why we have taken it upon ourselves to spread the ideas that have taken the form of beliefs in the form of stories. Amish Tripathi has been successful in bringing forth the purest soul of ancient India. He has brought out ancient fables and along with it, the grandest ideologies of those nameless sages who were contemporaries to his stories. While Chetan Bhagat focuses on that part of modern India that has been influenced by the Occident, and that is not even India herself. Storytelling is not just about telling a tale in the most enchanting manner, but it is about teaching an important lesson. The lessons and ideas in Tripathi's books are just modern translations of the ideas of Advaita, Dharma, Moksha, and whatnot. But in Bhagat's books, we see a mere fragment of it. This is because modern India has very little of itself in today's world. It has lost much of its identity. And this is the same unfortunate India from where Chetan Bhagat takes inspiration. Chetan Bhagat has no doubt portrayed real-life situations in the most magical ways. But when it comes to Indian ethics, we find very little of it in his stories. But Amish Tripathi recognizes that it was in those forgotten ages that the golden bird has spread its wings of enlightenment, such that India's contemporaries were awestruck by her people's beliefs. And therein lie the greatest tales, stories, and virtues, and the embodiment of India herself. Thank you.
Lakshwalya from DAV Chandrasekharpur, Chetan Bhagat.
So hypocrisy is the greatest compliment that can be given to virtue. With this, warm afternoon wishes to all my dear opponents and audience. So today's topic is Amish Tripathi versus Chetan Bhagat. So in a vast ocean of English literature, we have many different types of authors. Be it Amish Tripathi, be it Chetan Bhagat, they all have different styles, all have different tones of writing, correct? But before beginning, let me answer one of my opponent's question. She said that Chetan Bhagat does not throw much light over the Indian ethics and forums. But let me tell you, destroying our own history is not good. That Amish Tripathi does. He has his own imagination hub and he is unable to get out of it. In every story, he has to put some or the other, something which he portrays, something which he feels. Everything has his influence over it, be it Ramayana, be it Mahabharata or anything. Any ancient Vedas, scriptures, Puranas, he has no consideration about the ancient sages who wrote it. Were they crazy? As per Amish Tripathi, might be. Also, many people might feel that Chetan Bhagat is just a short story writer. But Amish Tripathi is a great novelist. Although he is. But being a short story writer, he has been able to throw light over the bad things that has been happening in society. Many, the bad practices, be it dowry or anything else, there are many examples that will be thrown light upon in coming times, which Amish Tripathi has failed to do. Is his source an authentic one? The books that he writes, is he authentic? Of course not. Whenever we read Chetan Bhagat, we know that whatever he is writing, we can practice that in our usual life. Can we do by reading the stories of Amish Tripathi? Definitely not. A person who is destroying our ancient history by writing bad or, the things which are hurting the sentiments of our people, of our Indians with a glorious history, does he deserve that we sit in a discussion, worthy audience, worthy contenders, sit over here in an audience and discuss about it? Definitely not. He's claiming that he is doing this for the goodness of the society, but he is not. I want to ask my worthy opponents, what has he done? What has he done to bring about a change in the society? With this, I conclude. Thank you.
Laksh makes some strong points there. Can Team Amish Tripathi defend? Let's have Sara Anvita from Delhi Public School, Kalinga.
India is the cradle of human race, the birthplace of human speech, the mother of history, the grandmother of legends, and the great-grandmother of traditions. Mark Twain remembers India in this way. And today, we have two sons of India who have time and again portrayed the glorious past and the contemporary present of India. On this note, this is Sara Anvita standing before you to speak for Amish Tripathi in this combat of Chetan Bhagat versus Amish Tripathi, who is better at telling stories. Amish Tripathi weaves his engrossing stories exhibiting an air of elegance and genius penmanship. His books are aimed at making India's rich mythological past accessible to the common man. The unique way in which he interprets Indian mythology is unheard of. His books invite a more human approach to the divine, which evidently gives the readers a better connection to the gods. His books don't tell you who's right or who's wrong. Rather, it defies a predefined evil. His characters are not legends. His books tell you how they became one. Mythology plays a large role in the rituals involved in society and in the way a community thinks and functions. Mythological stories provide comfort by giving the society a feeling of acceptance, inclusion, order, and connotation to this chaotic world. They provide moral conduct by which to live. Amish Tripathi beautifully incorporates Upanishads, Purans, and Buddhist essence in his mythological stories by weaving it in a contemporary and eloquent manner. Through his books, he takes the reader on a journey of the extremes experiences, the sudden and catastrophic events, reversals of fortunes and destiny. In short, his books cast a mirror reflection on today's society. Amish Tripathi's storytelling of India, of ancient India to be precise, is not driven by any extremism, nor is he spoon-feeding it to the unknown. And I thank Amish Tripathi for getting Indians into their roots. Thank you.
Indeed, getting Indians into their roots. Omkar Patnaik from KIT International, let's hear how you bat for Chetan Bhagat.
Greetings everyone. Prior to starting, I'll say, I'm a great fan of both Chetan Bhagat and Amish Tripathi, and I would get a book autographed by both of them. So, literature, it's a perennial stream of tales, while history, it's a reservoir of stories. Literature, it's a boundless realm, while history is constricted. Hence, we need to make a distinction between history and literature while we're addressing this issue. I have great regard for Amish Tripathi as previously stated, but what he writes is constricted to one genre, historical fiction. Look at Chetan Bhagat. Chetan Bhagat rightly fits into the description of a possible bard for India, someone who's versatile. Be it interstate marriages, be it the education fever, be it the aspirations of the youth. He writes about everything. He writes about novels, predominantly his favorite genre is romance, and even within that he experiments. He talks about notions which we don't often talk about. Half-girlfriend. Right, I expected a laugh at that. So while we might not agree with his opinions, his point of view, we can't deny that he accurately summarizes, he accurately captures the trends of the contemporary society. He writes articles, he writes political op-eds, which talk about issues such as pornography addiction, such as mobile addiction prevailing in the youth. While Amish Tripathi talks simply about the past, Chetan Bhagat talks about the past, he talks about the present, and the possibilities that India holds in the future. In his book, What Young India Wants, he talked about the ways in which India could become a developed nation. And while I don't agree with a lot of points in the book, I appreciate him for the effort he took. Being a novelist, literature teaches us to shun orthodoxy, to look at society from an untinted point of view, which history doesn't. Hence, I would say it's wrong. It's wrong to compare both of them together. I would say Chetan Bhagat has an edge over Amish Tripathi when it comes to summarizing the stories of India. But then, Amish Tripathi has to be given the due regard in talking about historical fiction, in giving his own perspective. Having said that, I would say the biggest testimony to Chetan Bhagat's success as a writer in summarizing India's stories is the reception to his literature. It's the people out over there who decide what literature should be, who decide what literature is, rather than a few people sitting with books, rather than the intelligentsia, the intellectual community. Chetan Bhagat's books have been made into movies, be it 3 Idiots, be it 2 States, and we watch those movies again and again. They find a place in the meme society. Why? Because people can relate to them. We all have had situations where we can relate to what Chetan Bhagat's movies are. Hence, on that note, I would like to conclude.
Now that's an honest debater who knows how to bat for both sides. Next is Sri Sikta Rath from DAV Pokariput for Amish Tripathi.
Hello everyone, good afternoon, honorable judges and my worthy competitors. This is Sri Shikta from DAV Public School Pokariput. And right now I'm going to address that according to my perception, Amish Tripathi is very well in writing Indian stories. India, the land full of mythology, with the richest history and the spellbound stories. Knowing India can definitely take a lifetime. Knowing India can definitely take a lifetime, but starting this journey takes just a minute. And the fuel that is required in order to kickstart this very journey must be taken from good books. Good books that are written by great authors about Indian history. In this context, the only author that's floating right now in my mind is none other than Amish Tripathi, the one who is very well known as India's Tolkien and India's very first literary pop star. Yes, the one who has redefined the Indian history, the Indian culture, the Indian past. Yes, the one who has reconstructed Indian mythology and gave us an insight about India through his stories. I would like to object a point that others says that he only writes about the past. But my dear, I think you haven't read one of my favorite writings that are done by Amish Tripathi. Yes, it's Immortal India. In his very book, Immortal India, it has different sections. Sections about religion and mythology, along with social issues, history, and musings. The way he tries to connect the dots, the way he plots the stories in that, proves that he is one of his own kind. His book, Immortal India, definitely deserves appreciation, as it shows about the myths regarding Aryan invasion, young Indians, British Bombay, as well as Amchi Mumbai. Modern India rules, along with addressing the social issues that India is facing currently. It's relating to decentralization, and his books has everything about India. It's deeply rooted to Indian culture, and that can be proved from his writings about the Ramchandra series or even the Shiva trilogy. So according to me, Amish Tripathi is the best when it comes to writing about Indian history, about Indian stories, and motivating us to read more about it. Thank you.
Shrisham Das from Sai International School, do your best for Chetan Bhagat.
I'm sure all of you must have watched the blockbuster movie 3 Idiots. You know,
The movie is based on a Chetan Bhagat novel, 5 Point Someone, which is published in 2004. In the novel, Chetan Bhagat explores the lives of Indian students and the complications of the Indian education system. He explores various topics about peer pressure on Indian students, societal pressure, parent pressure, and about how the Indian education system has been corrupted and it's very bad. Chetan Bhagat doesn't focus only on mythology. He focuses on the Indian general masses. Another of his novels, One Night at the Call Center, focus on the young Indian middle class, about their problems with insecurities, careers, inadequacy, marriage, and family confusion. Whereas Amish Tripathi focuses on Indian mythologies, which are part of history, Chetan Bhagat focuses on the current India, the new India. The ancient Indian tradition of telling stories is being carried forward by Indian writers like Chetan Bhagat, who are voicing the issues of the general Indian masses, hence truly telling India's stories.
Thank you. With that, we conclude our first round where speakers speak for 3 minutes. The next is where students will speak for 2 minutes, and the first one to go is Akansha Mishra from Mothers Public School.
Stories are memory aids, instruction manuals, and moral compasses for humankind. And storytellers are the greatest educators. If Chetan Bhagat holds up a mirror to the personal and professional lives of youngsters, Amish Tripathi does the same with mythology. With this, I, Akanksha Mishra, here to present my views for the motion of the House. Well, among the board, I have my personal favorite, and that is Amish Tripathi. And not on any random basis, but for vital points and very favorable points. As my very worthy opponent said, and I quote, that he has done nothing but has twisted the mythology and presented it. It has nothing new in it. But my dear opponents, do you even realize that the future India lies on the foundation of ancient India? The golden era of India, when India used to be the golden bird. When many foreign invaders looted it for years, and still we stand here as the fifth strongest economy of the world. All this basis is our past and our mythology. It is not just because our mythology is our past, and that is why we should focus on it, but mythology can also pave our future through the teachings, values, and lessons that it gives us through it. And as they said, Chetan Bhagat focuses on the young generation, but now I would like to put forward a question. Chetan Bhagat mostly focuses on the tragic life of youngsters and romanticizing it. But the major question that stands tall is how does it showcases Indian ethics, Indian rich culture, and India's magnificent influence on the ancient world. But on the other hand, Amrish Tripathi does all of it. He showcases the Indian culture like no other. And the Indian new generation can never stand it on its own and can never love this country if it is not aware of its old mythology and its old history and its old past. We should not forget that the very influential countries of Europe also got their independence on the basis of their history. Likewise, we also need to be well aware of it. And lastly, I would like to add that Amrish Tripathi not only fascinates but educates his readers through his writings, and he is one of his kind as a storyteller. Hereby, I would like to rest down.
Thank you, Akansha. I'm sure Amish Tripathi appreciates your advocacy for him. Ishan Das, Mr. D.A.V. Chandrasekharpur for Chetan Bhagat, please.
Literature is an equation that cannot be solved. Literature is a depth that cannot be reached. Literature is a height that cannot be achieved. I feel that Chetan Bhagat is a writer who does not restrict himself in one topic. You won't, my fellow competitors, my fellow worthy opponents, would not deny that Amish Tripathi is restricted to just mythology. Whereas Chetan Bhagat speaks about gay rights, about the youth, and especially in a country like India, where youth forms the backbone of the society, we need to appeal to the youth. Chetan Bhagat, in his books, like Two States, surely will tell you that in India, when you're marrying, it is not a marriage between two individuals. It is a marriage of two cultures, and most importantly, two families. Everyone would agree, right? In his book, like An Indian Girl, his book, like A Girl in Room 105, he writes, he places himself as a girl. And a girl in India is vulnerable to many problems in the society, whether it is from the family or whether she's traveling in a bus, she's being heckled, and God only knows what more. In a country where you people tell me about mythology, India is a country where, I'll tell you, Ma Kali, she can represent the Ministry of Defense because she fights the evil. But Chetan Bhagat is the one who shows that how can it be portrayed. As a critic, no offense to any religion, but if he was any other person of any other religion would not like that his epics, his past history, his glorious history is being crumpled upon. He's twitching and bending the stories, and I don't think it's acceptable on any part. Lastly, I'll agree on one point that Amish Tripathi is a good writer, but Chetan Bhagat always writes out of the box, and he shows the human side of human beings. With this, I would like to end my debate. Thank you.
From DPS Kalinga, Sheetal Mehak for Amish Tripathi.
In continuation to my pro-Amish Tripathi supporters, who has more or less covered everything that one has to speak about Amish Tripathi, for Amish Tripathi, this is Sheetal Mehak Rautrai from DPS Kalinga standing before you to speak why he has an edge over Chetan Bhagat from the latter side. Chetan Bhagat caters to the millennials, to the modern Indian youth with his formulaic writing on social trends. Sure, I'm impressed. He is the mirror that showcases the present Indian society, inclusive of their dreams, their aspirations, their successes, failures, love, and all of that. But his writings work because people don't want to do the work. His writing can be declared as a genre which does not go beyond a simple arena. A boy meets a girl and that's it. That to some extent is prevalent in the Indian setup, but it's naturally prevalent. It's universal, just in different sequences. Its plot is repetitive, sappy, and it's prominent in his works like Half Girlfriend, Two States, and the one that I have read, One Indian Girl, very recently. While his shortcomings also includes the character speaking in vernacular languages, which limits to certain sections of the Indian society, it's another thing to have an omnipresent narrator to sound that way. It often overrides the popular way he inculcated many Indians to start reading. But I also thank Amish Tripathi more because he understands the Indian society truly and tries to shape it with the interpretation of the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Aishwarya Priyadarshini from KIT International, please.
Greetings everyone present over here. Drawing upon the arguments presented by my competitors and my team, I would like to dissect the writings of Amish Tripathi. His stories presented are caged in a single genre, that is the mythological fiction. This part of history and myth resonates only with a fraction of Indian population. It does not portray the true aspiration of the young India, whereas Bhagat's writing are those that find a fresh perspective and explores the popular genres, be it Half Girlfriend or 5 Point Summer. These stories have found a place in people's heart. Moreover, Amish's novels they lack in proper representation and focus on a particular part of history. For example, the Immortals of Meluha, which glorifies the righteous Shiva who influenced the entire town. This has nothing to do with the real-life problems of an Indian girl whose problems have been depicted in Bhagat's stories. The UK essay that presents Tripathi's stories as promoting the Indianness of our culture is single-minded and one-dimensional. It only represents a part of our tradition and a part of our culture. These have been constituted of bedtime stories which are now not relevant to the modern society. these stories have become redundant and do not hold any value in today's contemporary society. I'm sure people would disagree, saying that these stories have lessons to be learned, but that is not the story of India. At last, I would like to conclude by saying that the past has been glorified enough. It is time to hear the voices of modern India.
Aurora Swine, DAV, Pokaripur.
A warm good afternoon to one and all present over here, esteemed judges and my worthy opponents. I stand for Amish Tripathi as better telling India's stories. As per my perception, Amish Tripathi is better than Chetan Bhagat. Let us look at his two sequels, for instance. The Shiv trilogy by him explained the mysteries and adventures of an extraordinary person 4,000 years ago, which are remembered as the myths of the Mahadev, the god of the gods. These are chronicled by his three books, The Immortals of the Meluhas, The Secrets of the Nagas, and The Oath of the Vayutras. The pivotal point is that his books are riveting and build curiosity for the readers. They take up fascinating fictions by building upon India's geography, history, and religion. The series draws a lot of intellectual connection between the readers and the previous books and are vivid in its description of India's history and framed culture. Similarly, in the series, the Ramchandra, Amish retains the essence of familiar mythological tales, and that is what is interesting. Similarly, Amish books are easy to read and have a page-turning style. They are accessible and easy to read. The Immortal India, the first non-fiction book by Amish, beautifully describes the integration of present and past of India. When one wants to write about the mythology, then there is no better place than India and no better area than dharma and drama. That is why Amish is better. Thank you. Have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you, Swastik Mohapatra, Sai International School, for Chetan Bhagat.
Literature is one of the most interesting and significant expressions of our humanity. Chetan Bhagat's works not only caters to the elite reading section of our society, but also to the general masses. His writings resonates with the common Indian man, highlighting and emphasizing various issues relating to the Indian citizens. One of his writings is Two States. It is not just about a story about a girl and a boy. It is the story of a couple coming from two states. Despite the differences, they face various adversities and try to stick together. Such writings written by Chetan Bhagat shows and strengthens the diversity of India. Unlike Amish Singh, Chetan Bhagat writes in a conversational mode where he expresses his thoughts, where the reader are his diary, where he writes and expresses his beliefs freely. Chetan Bhagat brought a reading revolution in India, which helped in many Indians picking up novels and start reading. Amish Singh writes in a substandard way, which is very far away from the general Indian citizen. Amish Singh's works are bleak and inconsistent. His writings of Melua, Amish Tripathi depicts Shiva smoking marijuana. He also defies Shiva and Ram. We have to decide what kind of writer we want, a flourishing one like Chetan Bhagat or a bleak one like Amish.
Thank you. Judges, I hope in the interest of time we are keeping scores and making sure that everything is up to date. The last round is the rebuttal round. We will start with Mothers Public School. Which of you would like to go on the offense or the defense? Let's see. Yes, please.
One of my worthy opponents mentioned that Amit Tripathi twists and turns history according to his own opinions. But Chetan Bhagat literally creates stories out of his own imaginations, and that too is his own opinions, right? And it is, I believe that it is not about the story being true or not, but it is about the principles and ideas that it teaches.
Okay. DPS Kalinga, would you like to take the rebuttal round next?
I do have a question where they
mentioned that Chetan Bhagat does a lot to reflect the Indian society in his books. How is he exactly reflecting the Indian society by enforcing the stereotypes of the Indian society in his books? His books are not even Indian in a way that any of the contents in his book can be put in anywhere in the world and that still fits. How is he a good Indian storyteller in that context?
Okay. DAV Chandrasekharpur, Chetan Bhagat, would you like to answer that?
So, my worthy opponent has said me that Chetan Bhagat's stories are created out of imagination. But that imagination has nothing to do with our glorious history, which Amish Tripathi has been destroying over the years. Also, I would like to say that one of my worthy opponent also claimed that our nation is going to move into future based on the foundation of our past, but Amish Tripathi has been destroying it. That is also quite evident. And one has also said that Chetan Bhagat writes stories that are tragic, but don't forget that he has been providing enough solutions and help how to create solutions for that and come out of the tragedy and everything. That's all.
Thank you. Kit International, who is going?
I'll firstly begin by asking a question to my wise friend from Mothers. What are Indian ethics? What do we define as Indian culture? What is Indian? What isn't Indian? By generalizing the whole idea of India, we are doing a great disservice to the nation. Hence, I would say, let's not generalize this thing. What Chetan Bhagat writes is as Indian as what Amish Tripathi does. But what Chetan Bhagat does is more representative of an India we are a part of. What Amish Tripathi does is a fraction of what India is. Amish Tripathi covers 1/3 of India, Chetan Bhagat covers the whole of India. My wise friend from DAV CSPU talked about an immortal India. Right, it's a great book, I would agree. But what does it talk about? Indian history and current Indian polity derived from Indian history. I understand that that Amish Tripathi has put a great effort into talking about how we currently have democracy by talking about Gana Pramukhs, by talking about the institution of democracy in Mithila and Kalinga. But then, is that something which the current populace, that resonates with the current populace? No. Hence, Chetan Bhagat always wins the battle when it comes to diversity, when it comes to verisimilitude, when it comes to the diversity of tastes that can be catered to. Magical scenarios, yes, completely agreed, and magic happens all around us. We have so many interstate marriages right now. How many people took inspiration from the film Two States? How many people, they find a similarity over there? That is what is the purpose of literature. There's a difference between academic literature and the literature of the people, and that is what Chetan Bhagat champions. Universal, repetitive, promoting stereotypes, right. Interstate marriage, how is that universal? A person from Tamil Nadu, a person from Punjab marrying together. That is something which is unique in India. The stereotypes, the whole notion you see around it, that's completely Indian. Repetitive, I would beg to differ. Please read his books. Stereotypes, I would again disagree. Stereotypes are a reflection of the society. To counter them, you have to talk about them. You just can't let them be an elephant in the room. With that, I would like to rest my case.
Sai International School, the last word.
One of our fellow competitors said that if we take Chetan Bhagat's stories and put it in various scenarios across the globe, it will still remain the same. But that is not the case. India is a diverse country and has various cultures. So if we take the example of Two States, one of his writings, in there he mentioned about a couple. So that won't work anywhere else in the world because India is a diverse nation. And Amish Tripathi's writings consist only of Sanatan Dharma, whereas India is a secular nation. There are many different masses which need to be addressed. Chetan Bhagat does that very well.
Thank you, dear students. With that, our debate ends. I hope...
Excuse me, ma'am. Ma'am, we have not got the chance for rebuttal.
Sorry. Please go ahead.
So one of my points that opponent said that Amish Tripathi tries to modify and write of his own and include his imagination in the history. But I would like to point and say that the juxtaposition of modern and ancient gives us interesting and unique makeover to the old story. The core remains the same, the soul remains the same, but the packaging with which the new books are done are fresh and new. And this is what that Amish story tried to portray in his books. And another point that I would like to say, that our future is decided on the basis of our past. So why not hear our past stories from Amish Tripaঠি's book, which will help us to get an insight to design our new future. And so much I have been influenced by the stories that have been written by Amish Tripathi, the sweep and the popularity of the fictional world that has been designed by him. It has driven me to such an extent that not only me, but many of his fans must be eagerly waiting for the Mahabharat series. Although it's not made by him, but the type of stories that he tries to make is definitely making us wait to get new stories from him. Thank you.
Thank you. May I request our judges to hand over the mark sheet to Diana here, and perhaps Aparna ma'am could share a few of her thoughts about how the students performed. Okay.
Check it. Check.
Hi, thank you so much for your lovely presentation, lovely debate. It was very interesting hearing you all. It's very clear that many of you have read the books and have done your due work, I think. The rebuttals, which came in a little ahead of the rebuttal round, were pretty strong. I think that's what stayed with me. Sometimes I think you were reading out. That was the one thing that I found, I mean, it would have been nice if you had actually made your points without reading out from a paper. But I think you did get the essential elements of both Chetan Bhagat's book and Amish's book. That was interesting. And without stepping into too many things, there were some sweeping statements about why you thought some of this was, very removed from history or removed from what really happened, or like, when you try to explain the mythology. But I think it was pretty interesting, the essentializing of both the authors. There was some time, I think, where you had exceeded the time, a few of you. But I pretty liked some of the things that you said about, voice of, I think somebody said, one of them was a voice of modern India. I think it was about Aishwarya Priyadarshini. I think she called Chetan, the voice of modern India. And somebody else also had a literary pop star about Amish, which was also pretty interesting. I think that was Sri Shishta. Those were, I think, pretty interesting. On the whole, it was a very even debate. I think both the sides were pretty, I think well matched. So it was, I've not had very varying marks to give. So let's see what the outcome is going to be.
Rituparna ma'am, please.
Okay, so as a storyteller, and I think the topic is so interesting that you have two very, very, very popular writers who write bestsellers, both of them. Let's bring, again, I was talking about lines not dividing, but I think lines uniting. Both of them got a lot of people to read, which is, I think, one of the most unifying factors about both the writers. And it's a pity that both of, the debate has two very popular writers and you have to choose between one and the other. And I'm sure all of you read both the writers. And therefore speaking, I think this gentleman from KIT did the most best thing that I would have done too, which is to give the credit to both of them for doing the good things. But having said that, there are a couple of things which I felt was a uniform, came across as a distinction. And you are at where you are as a reader, which you will evolve with time. At your age, I think what you're reading is what is also being understood, interpreted with your worldview and perspective. But I would like you to open your minds up while you're debating to understand that who are they writing for, right? I did not see anyone talk about who are they writing for, the audience that they are writing for, and that could have been a wonderful way to distinguish the two and talk about the merits of writing for a particular audience and what their writing has done. The second thing which I felt was standing out, and I saw lines overlapping between both parts, is about Chetan Bhagat being the custodian of contemporary India, whereas him being the custodian of past, which is history. It's not historical fiction, it's mythological fiction, to be very fair to Amish and his writing. And mythology is not history. So as somebody who's a reader, to understand that there are different genres of storytelling, what does Amish really write? He writes on mythological fiction. It's not even historical fiction. So mythology is not history. So having said that, I completely agree with Aparna that reading out slows you down. It makes you tied down. I did see in some people the sparks of their writing, or whatever they spoke of, was not what they had written before they get on stage, but what they have sort of tweaked immediately after listening to somebody else, and that's the true sense of a good debater. You go with maybe 3 points and add 2 based on what you've heard others say. So that gives you that freedom to play around with what your mind is. And again, that's the beauty of a debate. You get to listen to others and rework your content than wait for the rebuttal. And when you've done that, you shows that you are in the debate and you are actually listening to the others. So great effort, and totally loved listening to all of you. Thank you.
So we have a winner, and that is KIT International School. Round of applause, please. May I request CEO Ma'am Lakshmi Menon and the judges, please, and our editorial director as well, Mr. Prabhu Chawla, to please come up on stage to felicitate the winners. Come on. So that's Omkar Patnaik, Aishwarya Priyadarshini from KIT International School. The runners-up are DPS Kalinga and Sheetal, Mehak and Sara Anvita. Round of applause for them. Thank you, students. Thank you for your enthusiasm. Thank you, judges. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Was that not an engaging session looking at the younger generation of India, talking about the contemporary writers and how they plan on to take the literary paradigm ahead? Was it not an interesting debate? Can we have a huge round of applause for the efforts of our students and also the winners? Having a look at the younger generation talk with such clarity, putting in their efforts, talking about the literary scenario in India, and especially talking about contemporary writers is a matter of pride for the literary festival, Odisha Literary Festival 2022, themed My Country, My Kahani, and these are the people who are going to take ahead the story of India ahead. For us, majority of Indians, is it not Pani Puri that scores over the elitist jam scones? But do we have the same taste when it comes to literature, or do we choose? Do we have enough Indian taste to when it is concerned about literature, or do we have enough Indian tales that will give us the taste of such Indian literary tradition? To answer these queries, we have with us Aparna Karthikeyan, author and journalist, Sridhala Swami, author and poet. Aparna Karthikeyan is a storyteller and an independent journalist. She volunteers for the People's Archive of Rural India and has written for the famed and reputed institutions like the Hindu, the Caravan, the Wire, and has published books and short fiction regarding children. Shridhala Swami has to her credit her first collection of poems, A Reluctant Survivor, which had been shortlisted for the Sakti Bhatt First Book Award, followed by Escape Artist, which was shortlisted for the Kushwant Singh Poetry Prize. She was the 2011 Charles Wallace Writer at Residence, University of Stirling, Scotland. She was also a fellow of the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa in 2013. In 2020, she was on the jury of the Montreal International Poetry Prize. May I make a humble request to both the ladies to be on the dais for the next session. Ma'am, please. Audience, can we have a generous round of applause, please? This session has been dedicated a good time, and we hope we have good questions coming up. Thank you.
And thank you so much for helping judge that. Aparna, I'd like to start with you. You heard the kids talking today. What did you take away from them in terms of what are the stories that they like to hear, the stories they like to read, the stories that they like to tell?
I think it was pretty interesting because we had, I think, kind of a, what shall I say, a difficult choice that we placed before them. Two very popular authors, as Rituparna said.
Right.
And between them, it's quite hard to choose, and it's a very, what shall I say, notional divide by saying that it's contemporary and this is, from the past.
Right.
But it's not quite that, right? We are talking to people who are telling the stories that we think people want to hear, whereas we are missing out on the processes of our time. Right. Chetan talks about a certain kind of process, and I think he makes a very, what shall I say, a very good job of doing that. But we are seeing so many more churns around our country at this point. Are we debating enough? Are we, dealing enough with those churns? And do these two authors really represent that churn, the great processes? If you look at COVID-19, what happened? The collapse of so much of infrastructure. If you look at the great inequalities, some of that comes in, of course. But if you look at, invisibilized labor, if you look at women, so you can cherry pick and take the easy points and talk to them. And I think it's very easy to relate to those books because they don't draw you in or make you think that deeply. So would they be the, what shall I say, the bellwether? Would they be the deciding factor? I don't know. I don't know if that would, give me enough to say that, is this what India is relating to? But from today, yes, I think it seems like a very superficial debate where we are collapsing the complexities and we are saying it's either about today or about the past.
Right. It isn't so simple.
It isn't.
Sridhala?
Yeah. I wasn't there for the entirety of the debate, but from what I could hear, it's interesting that debates are structured in such a way that you have to answer what you've been given to talk about. So, it's possible that they had different viewpoints, but within the structure of the debate, they have to answer or rebut or talk about what they've been given to talk about. Because 3.5 minutes, 2.5 minutes, and one rebuttal is not enough to give you the complexity of the issue. But given that, I think there was a decent variety of opinion within the range of their experience and their reading, which is commendable.
Yeah. Talking about range of experiences, Aparna, you've traveled so deeply into, Tamil Nadu especially, with all the reporting that you've done for Pari. What are those stories that you hear? And, do you see that diversity and that brilliance reflected, when you come to urban areas, when you come to English, or even when you come to reading Tamil literature? Do you see that brilliance being reflected?
In Tamil literature, sure.
Yeah.
In parts of, I think, Indian journalistic tradition, yes, of course. What I think is missing is this great disconnect between the art, the artist, and the consumer. Okay, so I think, the sari that I'm wearing, or, what you are wearing, what she's wearing, all of this comes from great traditions.
Yeah.
The everyday aesthetics that people kind of coded into our art. We don't appreciate the artist enough, I
Right.
think. One way of, journalism is that you are trying to bridge that gap between the art, the artist, the consumer, and making people see what is so easily invisibilized. Why is this a problem? Because you have hierarchies in India. You have the hand versus head hierarchy, where you have anything that is, the head versus hand.
Yeah.
You have anything that is intellectual, getting paid more,
Right.
getting much more visibility. Like, why are we sitting here and talking about this and not the actual people who are doing the jobs,
Yeah.
I mean, putting the food on the table or getting these saris or, anything that's beautiful out there. Why are they not here? It's because we value a certain kind of, let's say, a knowledge as the one that, we want to showcase and present. So my job is to see that we break some of those hierarchies where there is gatekeeping, and if I get an opportunity to see if I can push in somebody else's voice,
Yeah.
not necessarily my voice.
That's what's so lovely.
Yeah.
I think that we should at least try and reflect other voices
Yes.
apart from our own.
Yeah.
Sritala, your poetry obviously informs your other writing as well. How does it inform that?
Actually, it's the other way around. It's everything else that informs the poetry.
Right.
Because I think it's the poetry that's the constant, and all the other things that I do are varied. Sometimes I'm a photographer, sometimes I used to be once upon a time I used to be a film editor. I have written for children, I've written journalism. So it's the other things that inform the poetry rather than the other way around. But I think
So you're at heart a poet, and then everything else.
I hesitate to say I'm at heart anything, because tomorrow I will change my mind about that. So let's say currently in my heart I'm a poet.
Right.
Yes.
So when you look at the literature that's available, I know you've written Chinu's Gift, and you've written, I love that idea of Kali wants to dance, right? So these are people we've seen or we've heard of, stories that we can relate to. But of course, I mean, I come from a generation that grew up on, Enid Blyton's, and I'm older than you guys, but what have we missed out? And do you think we're able to connect our children or the ones that will follow to our traditions and to our storytelling? Because we had to wait for the Ramayana and Mahabharata in 86, 87 for it to come on screen before we, some of us who were called the deracinated crowd, actually understood the importance of these stories.
I'd like to just share a thing somebody said to me. The Community Library Pro in Delhi, Mridula Koshi had copies of Chinu's Gift among the books in the library. And she said some of the feedback from the actual readers was, this is the first time I'm seeing a kabadiwala represented in a story for children.
And in such a positive way, without any,
Yes.
Yes, kabadiwalas are like the...
Yes, so when we talk about tradition also, I want to say that while a kabadiwala or our way of recycling things traditionally is something to be, celebrated in a sense, it also, that work itself is never pleasant.
Yeah.
And the people who do it never find themselves in stories, they never find themselves on screen, never find themselves talked about. And as you said, often not positively, they might just be a background to something else that's happening. So I think there's something to be said for finding the things that don't often catch the eye of people. Like all the people in Aparna's books. You eat that panavellam, you play that drum, you use those objects. But there is a whole lived experience behind it, and you never see it. Because all of those people are invisibilized in order to celebrate the tradition. So you celebrate the object of that tradition, but you don't celebrate the people who produce those objects.
Very well said. You know, we love to talk about our culture of recycling and reusing and upcycling, which has all become very fashionable. And yet, when a kabadiwala becomes the hero of the story and his son and he become the hero of the story, we will often find children who've grown up in gated communities who may not even have seen a kabadiwala, you know, in their lives. So that invisibilization that you're talking about is actually a daily process. It's happening. I mean, professions are just disappearing before our eyes, right? So how important is it that you are able to represent them correctly?
So I think the first thing is not romanticize the profession. Yeah, and also recognize that my culture is the history of somebody else's oppression.
Yeah.
That was the penny drop moment for me.
That's true. You know, we
so-
forget that.
Yeah, yeah. And also that some of these professions are not necessarily aspirational, I think. You
Yeah.
know, like the kabadiwala or like, you know, many of the forms that I have in my book, they are not livelihoods that are aspirational because they're caught within a caste and class vortex and a gender vortex. How do you break out of it? How does society, you know, only choose to engage with the culture, only choose to engage with the art, but not the people, the livelihoods? Why they are, you know, often doing the livelihoods? My daughter is not entitled, or my daughter's not going to be forced to take on my occupation.
Right.
You know, journalism with all its trappings, it's fun, it's great to do and all of that, but it has its own challenges. She's not going to have to inherit this work, but you have generations of people doing that work. So why don't we find these stories out there? It's because people think it's not sexy enough.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if I go and pitch a 5,000-word story about a woman salt maker in Tuticorin to a newspaper or a website, am I going to get the space to, you know, tell that story? I'm not. So I'm
Unless
lucky.
there is something there that is, you know, appealing to someone.
So, you know, I'm lucky that I have, you know, a grant. I'm lucky that I have a platform that will take these stories in the way that I want them to,
Right.
you know, with the integrity, and I have an editor who appreciates that. But it's not going to happen all the time, right? So when the story is out there, everybody likes it. But how do you get the story out there? I mean, do we have the resources? Do we have the spaces for that? I think that's going to be our actual real debate. Like you said about the Ramayana, has the time come for Indian stories? I think Sridharala and I were talking about this. Yes, I mean, absolutely. JCB Prize is full of translations, which means that Indian language stories are
being
selling,
read
right?
and selling.
Yeah, and everybody wants to access them in English, right? So we do have like a vibrant translation thing going now. But are we having the space to, you know, report on these everyday happenings, on the everyday people in newspapers, you know, in popular media? I don't know.
Yeah, so the challenge is that this remains a very small niche kind of storytelling. How do we popularize it?
I'm not sure. I think, you know, I keep thinking cinema used to be the way to do that once upon a time. And I think before liberalization, there were more diverse stories being told in terms of, like, if you just saw the professions of people, you know, whether they were factory workers or whatever it is, there were just more diverse storytelling opportunities at that time. I think it's a question of, you know, when you begin to cater to an audience, then you narrow your storytelling to fit what you perceive to be the audience. But if you do not tie yourself to who you imagine your audience is, but write what you want to write.
What you want to.
Perhaps it will find its audience.
Right.
You know, after all, Gitanjali Shree's book just won the Man Booker Prize. And until it won the prize, nobody knew that they wanted to read those stories.
Or nobody knew of Gitanjali, poor woman.
Indeed. So, you know, you just write what you want to write, and I think sometimes the stories find their audience regardless.
Right.
And I'm sure, I wasn't here yesterday, but I'm sure Manoranjan Baipari's stories, for instance, you know, until it happens, you don't know there is an audience for it. So I think instead of trying to back end the story by writing from a marketing perspective of who you think the audience is, just write from a writer's perspective, and then you will find your audience.
Yeah. So when you wrote Kali Wants to Dance or Woof, which I find very sweet, and your cat story, so cute. What were you thinking? Is this the kind of thing that will work, or this was just something that you wanted to write?
I think I completely agree with Sridhala. It's just what, I end up writing what I want to read. And I've just got lucky that, I've had the spaces to do that. And, Sridhala and I were discussing.
Often when you have kids, you write to entertain your kids, and then it's, if they like it, other kids will like it.
What do you talked about a daughter, so I presume
she's 24, so she's
okay. So she's way beyond.
But she's my first reader, my beta reader, like
Right.
the person who's like, getting to read the worst of the drafts, and like, it's like, Mummy, it's okay, it'll get better from here.
And how important is it for you to find that perfect illustrator? I often think that illustrators are so sort of appreciated, because they really do add the magic to your words, don't they?
Absolutely. I mean, I was lucky in that Sushila's columns had Priya Kurian, who's an amazing
I think she's the goddess of
yes.
illustrated
But, even the other books by Pratham, or, if you look at Nilanjana Roy's Wildings, the drawings in that, when you tell a story for an audience that's moving slowly from a pictorial depiction into a fully word-based story, it's very important to draw them in with the pictures, because I think their imagination is so broad and so unrestricted at that age that the pictures allow them to make something else of the story altogether.
They also might not be, they also might be the first learners of English in their family, right? So how important is that? Because that graduation also has to be made, and the parents should not feel completely out of that conversation with the children, right?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this. I think whether it is an adult or a child, when we're talking about English language, I think it's really, so when I wrote this book, for example, I look at much of my reporting work or writing as an act of translation.
Right.
Because
actually,
it is,
it is
done in Tamil, and then all the interviews, and then I write it in English. And just by the act of writing in English, and I'm collapsing a lot of dialects into one dialect, which is, available to me in English. So that is itself an act of erasure, right? I am erasing somebody else's dialect, and in that process, removing words which are regional, which are local. So whether it is a child or it is an adult, when they come and read something that I have written, they are reading it in an alien tongue, automatically, right? So for a child to first read a book in English, I think it can be quite intimidating.
But actually, I did want to ask you, do these stories that you've written about these people go back to them as the completed stories? How do they, so Pari translates, I know that,
Pari
so they are able to see what you've written about them.
And what we do is when I do write them as well, call up the people repeatedly and ask them if I have accurately said what they wanted to say, by retranslating it back into Tamil, just so that, there is nothing lost
in translation.
But for a child, I think, it is very intimidating, whether it is reading, any book. And I think pictures, as she said, really does bridge that gap. And one thing that, I did want to bring up with Sridhala was related to what you were asking, is how we don't see so much of contemporary poet in textbooks, unless I'm missing something. At least when my daughter went to school, there wasn't so much contemporary poems. So would that also be something intimidating for a child? I mean, one is, of course, accessing it in English and accessing Milton and Keats. Not, something that happened.
Yeah, I think, I've forgotten my own experience of it, and I know that my son went to schools where, regardless of what the syllabus taught you, there were people who were teaching poetry. So I think I'm the wrong person to ask about a textbook approach to how poetry is taught in schools. But I think there has been some attempt to include some contemporary Indian poets in syllabuses.
Yeah, but it stops at Nissim Ezekiel, the Night of the Scorpion type.
Yes, there will be
it
a Nissim
go
Ezekiel
beyond that.
or a Give Patel. Yeah, I mean, there are about 4 or 5 poems you will know, and that's about it.
Right,
but I
it
think,
still remains pretty much what we grew up with, except me, and also the whole idea of daffodils and things like that, which I mean, even now, I actually cannot recognize a daffodil. I'm very sorry.
I mean, I have to say, I don't know what a scone is. So there we are.
Exactly. But we read about these words, and if they're alien to us and foreign to us, I can't imagine the little child sitting in a little school
But I
somewhere.
did want to say about that is that, you know, there is no person who encounters a story who doesn't want to claim the world in the story for themselves and thereby making the world a larger place for themselves. So we grew up in an India where, and actually an Enid Blyton is an alien presence, you know, the stories that they tell. But I mean, until I ate an actual cold, hard-boiled egg, which is disgusting, I thought that was an amazing thing to take with you on a picnic, you know. And that didn't matter because you know, your imagination made something amazing of it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if something is Indian or not. You know, if it opens up the minds of a person reading that book, whether it is an Indian detail or something you've never encountered, it exists as something in your memory until you do encounter it. At this age, I have not eaten a scone, but one day I will, and I will relate that to everything that I've ever read, including this session. And that will be great.
Yeah.
I just have one small point about that. I think it's like if you're reading widely and, you know, a real varied
just
thing.
put the mic a little closer, yeah.
I think, you know, if you're reading widely in a very varied sense, then it's okay. But if you are going to be limited to a few books, are these books representational enough?
Yeah.
Are we, you know, speaking back to ourselves? Are we celebrating? Like I said, you know, for
That's
me,
absolutely true.
you know, it's just that, you know, when we have a chance, when we have, say, somebody, you know, to give somebody 5,000, 7,000 words and say, this is your non-detailed text for this year, do you want that to reflect, you know, us, as in like the now us? Because then we, you know, tell people you have no idea what's happening in the world. You are getting your information from WhatsApp. So there is also that argument, right? And the one way to set that argument right is to actually give people the correct narratives. And correct is, of course, always subjective. I'm not saying that there is one version of correct, but at least as far as possible, talk about the people that they would otherwise not encounter, like you said, in the gated communities or whatever. You know, when people have a chance to read 10 books, can we slip in this one as, you know, something reflective, something that they should reflect on? So.
Yeah.
That is absolutely true. I agree. I think your position and your privilege allows you access to a whole lot of things, and that enlargement may not be possible for a lot of people. So it is necessary also to have the kind of stories that make them feel seen and feel like they belong in this world of books. You know, if you're alienating them to such an extent, if you're alienating a reader to such an extent that they don't see themselves at all in the literature that they're reading, then they will just not read it.
Yeah. Of course, the big challenge is getting them to read in the first place, isn't it? Is that still a big challenge?
I mean, from kids' books, I think there is a lot of interest. So I hear these two arguments, you know, one that people only read a certain kind of literature, and that children don't read at all, and then they're only consuming things, you know, through visual media.
Yeah.
But I also see very, you know, committed readers who actually write back and tell you how the story spoke to them. So you see a bit of this variance, just like with, you know, older people. I saw this tweet yesterday which sort of broke my heart, which said that, you know, writers are a small community of people who beg each other to read the book, but then don't read anything beyond tweets. Who don't? Read anything beyond tweets.
Okay, so that's quite
rude, isn't
yeah,
it?
it's apart from everything else.
Yeah.
But, you know, the whole idea that we're living in this world where there's so much information, people are just so jaded, yet does it, has someone told you things about your story which have surprised you, or which you've, you know, for instance, when you talked about Chinu's gift, the fact that they've never seen a kabadiwala being represented, has something sort of struck you like that and you said, wow, is there been like a wow moment?
I mean, that was my oh wow minute in a sense. And also, I'm always pleasantly surprised when people, you know, recently on Twitter, somebody asked me permission to translate my poems into Kannada.
Wow.
He said, I've been trying to get in touch with you for a long time. I've been wanting to do it. And And most of the poems that he translated were from my first collection, which is no longer in print, which you will never find in a bookstore. You might not even find in a second-hand bookstore. But somehow he had got a copy of it and he translated this poem. And I was really touched because it's been 14 years since that collection. And there is someone who cares enough about that poetry who wants to share it in another language with his readers. So it's always unexpected when you find a reader. You know, you were saying, do we have readers? They're there. They're there, and they want to share that.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
Aparna?
It's happened, yes.
Yeah? Tell me about it.
I think Kali Wants to Dance has traveled quite a bit.
Yeah.
And, you know, to book clubs and schools. And it's become this book where, you know, young underprivileged students particularly, when they want to dance, you know, and they're very hesitant about it.
Boys.
They see this, boys, girls, you know, they see this, you know, a little young man with brown skin who looks like them, who is a dancer, who's a celebrated dancer, who's an award-winning dancer, right? That gives them hope. So that gives them something. And Woof has actually made a lot of people adopt indies, which I'm thrilled
Which is
about.
so lovely.
Yeah.
Great. Do we have questions from the crowd, or can I ask you to please, you know, maybe read from your book, and perhaps you'd like to read a poem, or?
I'll read a poem.
Yeah.
So
Maybe from the one that's not available, or is this?
Oh, I don't have that. But I mean, I can recite a poem from that. That's not a problem. So this one is called Shelter. Strength comes from within. I want to be like a tree on which the birds rest, but when they fly away, there is no pain. Just the peace of the air, the feel of the wind on my leaves, which drop when the seasons change with no regret. And maybe I'll read one from this collection. So, you know, I'm reading this poem called Hunger Stones, which for a long time I saw this. I think you'll have seen this on social media recently with climate change and everything. You'd have seen this news of these stones under the river in Germany, which emerged after a long time. And on it was carved the words which translated say, when you see this, then weep. Because it meant that things were so dire that the stones appeared.
Okay, wow.
Okay, so they're called hunger stones. And for the longest time, I had that with me, but I didn't have a poem. And when the pandemic happened, and you know, there was the sudden lockdown, and then people were finding their way back home, somehow it just clicked into place, and this poem came out of that. So it's called Hunger Stones, and the epigraph in German is, wenn du mich siehst, then wein, which is, when you see them, then weep. Hunger stones. The stones appeared, after all, but they were not under the ground or revealed gradually in a slow, creeping disaster no one noticed until it was upon them. Suddenly they were there. They dragged at the feet of children crying to be picked up because they'd walked too long on too little. Men and women, young and old, carried stones for rations as they walked back to a place they called home. When the stones appeared, the people were cleaved. It was the hunger. It was vast, vast as the stores of grain hoarded against just such a day people long ago prepared for, but now that day had arrived, the hoard had turned to rot. The stones appear when the living can no longer imagine even the present. When you see them, then weep.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aparna?
Sure. I mean, I'd like to read a very small passage.
Sure.
From this story called 50 Feet Above. It's about the palm tree climbers of Tamil Nadu and how they make palm jaggery, and which is something which you know, I've always enjoyed as a treat and also in sweets, but the labor is terrible. So I'm just going to read a small bit from that. This is about a lady called Muniamma, who is from this district called as Ramanathapuram. On a good day, Muniyamma stuck inside the hut for at least 9 hours, boiling up 3 batches of karapatti. Karapatti is palm jaggery. Every minute she's inside, bent over or crouched next to the wood fire, she's breathing in fumes. Her face is scorched and her eyes smart and tear up. None of my sisters were married to palm tree climbers, she said, sighing and stirring. My parents did this work. I was the 4th daughter. My sister's husbands work on salt pans, but they got me married to him, she pointed outside, where Rajendran, her husband, was cutting palm fronds. Despite her angst, she did not once curse her job. Invited to talk about the process and her routine, she spoke at length about the upkeep of the mud stove. With hands darkened by fire, she patted and rubbed the air. This is how she applies cow dung on the stove to smoothen the sides, and this is how she keeps it from cracking from the heat of the burning firewood. What about you? I asked. She wiped her face with the edge of her synthetic sari and continued to stir the padanir.
Yeah, just one more, if I'm not being greedy.
No, sure. As the sap boiled inside a 4-foot wide aluminium pan over a waist-high firewood stove set deep in the ground, Muniyamma poked with a palm frond at the fizzy, frothy hat that rose to the top, and it obediently settled back into the pan. Earlier, she had picked out ants and bees with a muslin cloth off the surface of the freshly tapped padanir. Now and then, she added half a pinch of castor seeds. Sometimes it is a drop of coconut oil to keep the padanir from boiling over. She kept an eye on the fire beneath at all times, adjusting the heat by adding to or arranging the wood. The liquid became a syrupy caramel, and the hut was scented with a sharp, sweet smell layered with that of wood fire. As it thickened, her strokes got heavier, as if she was trying to row in a sea of brown custard. She poured some of the scoocharu, just a stage away from becoming karupatti, into a plated palm leaf bowl and offered it to me. The warm, sweet liquid soothed my throat, but the memory of her labor is bitter.
Wow. So much detail in 2 little passages of so much labor. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Quickly, is there a question? Quick. Then we have to break for lunch. We're all very hungry, especially after reading that. Yeah.
Both of you talked about how literature can be made more accessible by introducing characters who are rooted in various cultures that we have in our country. How do you think we can make such an infrastructure which will help us, introduce such characters, like various different kind of characters, so that like kids and everyone is aware about it from like smaller.
What do you mean by infrastructure?
Infrastructure as in how can we make people more aware that there are more, like people are stuck in their own worldview. So how can we make it, how can we help them?
I think do you mean libraries or things
something
like that, which can actually allow people to step out of their bubbles? I think it's a very noble idea, but how do you do it? Can we just leave everything to the state? If some things have to be done by the community as well.
Of course not, and that includes people who should be looking for diverse stories. The thing also is that the easiest thing to do is to find something that you already like and then keep finding more of it.
Right.
But I think it's also up to each reader to kind of find something different than what you usually like, and stay patient while you go through it, because it's not immediately to your taste. So it takes a little time for you to get used to it. But stick with it is the work. Ultimately, you can get all the support from libraries, from the state, from people bringing everything to you right into your hands. But ultimately, you're the one who's got to have to read and stick with it.
Aparna?
I think there is a lot happening in some sense. Like if you look at Karnataka rural libraries, Uma Mahadevan, I think she's doing a fantastic job of introducing.
Who's that?
Uma Mahadevan.
Okay.
She's doing a fantastic job of introducing, books into every little panchayat library.
Oh.
Okay, so you do have, and you have Pratham, okay,
Right.
and which takes, I think, this extremely diverse set of titles.
And also the free library movement with Community Library Pro and Birsha Library and all of these places.
Yeah, so and the Pratham books are priced also very, reasonably, about $50 a book. So and that does get books, into people's hands, and you have read a book and stuff. So I think there is enough infrastructure if you know where to look for, so to speak. But it's up to the individual reader, you know, what one picks up. Dominant culture is always the culprit.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we spoke in the previous session. You have Hollywood, then you have Bollywood, and then you have a hierarchy where you have Southern films.
Yeah.
But Southern films are ruling now.
Absolutely.
Right? So you need to get to a point where you have the Indian content, so to speak, you know, come up,
Right.
bubble up, you know, over this other stuff. And I think it's just
It's
a matter
happening.
of time.
Yeah.
It's
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We're now going to break for lunch, so all of you hungry people can have lunch. It was so delightful to talk to both of you. Thank you very much. And thank you for judging our little people, little kids as well. Thank you.
After such a session that would have kept the ardent devotees of literature glued to it, may I make a humble request to Lakshmivanan ma'am to please be on the stage to present the mementos to the panelists. Can we have a round of applause for such a session, guys? Ma'am, can we have a group photo, please? After such engaging sessions and food for thought, we would like to take a pause. You have been an adorable audience. We wish to meet you right after the break at 2:30 for more such interesting sessions. Thank you, guys. And may I request you all to have your lunch, which has been arranged outside the auditorium.